Chapter 111. Shula's hand that was holding the phone froze for a moment, then he simply said, "Okay." He put the phone away and came back to his senses. It had been more than 20 days since the ball, and he hadn't seen Zhong Xiaoming for more than 20 days. He looked at his class schedule and realized that the next day was the last day of December. Of course, there were no classes. He realized that the peace and solitude had lasted for so long that he had forgotten about the arrival of the new year. At this time, Zhong Xiaoming was in a daze in her single apartment. She glanced at the black-rimmed glasses by her hand, and her delicate face showed a trace of distress and struggle. After the Double Moon Festival ball, Tai Jiyuan disappeared again, and she couldn't find any opportunity to get close to that person. The failure of this mission didn't make Senator Macklin unhappy. On the contrary, the fatherly elder comforted her and told her to be careful and hide her identity. At the same time, he secretly pointed out that since the male student named Shula met Tai Jiyuan by chance, perhaps there would be a good result if she set out from there. Should she use Shula to get close to that person? Zhong Xiaoming's long eyelashes fluttered twice, and she immediately rejected this idea. She didn't want to hurt that man again after hurting him. On the last day of the 66th year of the 37th Constitution, the Federation was immersed in the atmosphere of celebrating the new year. Although the Empire, which was light years away and across the galaxy from the westwards, was still a shadow in the hearts of the Federation citizens, the front lines were too far away, and everyone subconsciously didn't think about that problem. The people of the Federation cast their anxious gazes toward the S2 region. After the election in the S2 region surrounded by the mountains, the Federation government's accusations against the opposition members intensified, accusing them of not really laying down their weapons. The federal military also began to step up its preparations for war. The outbreak of the civil war once again seemed to be inevitable. Senator Medellin, who was born in the anti-government army, had successfully been elected as a member of the new Federation Management Committee. He had truly entered the core political area of the Federation. However, no matter how loudly he shouted in various meetings in the capital special district, he could not really eliminate the danger of civil war. This was because everyone knew that Senator Macklin could influence the people in the 4 states, but he could not influence the anti-government armed forces in the mountains. After years of embargoes and economic sanctions by the Federation, the anti-government forces in the mountains were on the brink of collapse. They could not just wait to be suppressed by the Federal Army. They would definitely choose some kind of counterattack. Although there were so many worries, for the ordinary citizens of the Federation, life had to go on. These questions about politics and life and death could only make them sigh and lament when they read the electronic newspaper. On New Year's Eve, all the famous restaurants were fully booked, and the neon lights of the amusement park began to shine in the daytime, creating a peaceful and happy scene. Family members and lovers who had holidays occupied the large Ferris wheel and the special restaurants in the world of ice and snow. Compared to the liveliness, the towering Iron Tower in Linhai had lost its charm as a tourist attraction and became incomparably quiet. This was because not many people were willing to run to the top of the Iron Tower in such a cold winter. Shula didn't take the elevator. Instead, he carried his backpack and climbed up the Iron Tower step by step. His face was slightly red, and beads of sweat seeped out from his hair. However, his breathing was still steady, and he didn't feel tired at all. Today, he could already train his nerves and muscles in his daily life, making the mysterious power in his body more and more peaceful, and also more and more powerful. The cold wind whistled on the sightseeing floor of the Iron Tower. The orange-colored lights were pulled into lonely lines, nestled on the cold metal body. There was no one, only a girl in a dark brown windbreaker by the railing in the distance. She was holding her chin and looking at the city scenery of Linhai in a daze. She wore a cute velvet hat and pink gloves. Her long eyelashes blinked in the cold wind, but as if she did not feel the cold, she just quietly looked outside the railing. Shula was a dozen meters behind her, quietly looking at her, somewhat lost in thought. They had not seen each other for a few days, but when they met again, his state of mind returned to the original situation, incomparably calm and happy. "You're here." Zhong Xiaoming turned around and smiled at him. Shula walked up and gently smiled. He took off the backpack on his back and threw it at her feet. Standing beside her, He followed her gaze and looked outside the railing. He saw a few clouds floating in the snowless sky, and on the roofs of the buildings in Linhai, there were traces of ice and snow left from this winter. The whole city was in a New Year's atmosphere, but he still felt a little lonely. The scenery here is not very good. Shula imagined the girl's mood when she looked here and said, "Why did you want to meet here?" "When I was young, my parents were very busy with work, and I didn't want to sit in those small rooms on the Ferris wheel, so I like to come here to see the scenery by myself." Zhong Xiaoming exhaled a mouthful of fog and stared blankly at the shadow of the Ferris wheel in the distance. She said, "That day at the ball, I refused to dance with you. I hope you don't mind. I said that day, I don't know how to dance." Shula still narrowed his eyes and looked at the grey sky. He said, "If you still want to say sorry today, I think it's meaningless. Although I have never been in love, I know there is no right or wrong in this kind of thing. You've changed a bit." Zhong Xiaoming suddenly turned her head to look at him and laughed. "That time in front of the teaching building, you were much more eloquent than you are now." Shula also thought of that conversation and said with a smile, "Back then, I saw things too simply." He turned his head and quietly looked at the light flowing in Zhong Xiaoming's eyes. He noticed that she was not wearing her black-rimmed glasses today. He said softly, "Until today, I still think things are very simple. It's just that, other than me, people in this world always have a habit of making simple things very complicated." Zhong Xiaoming did not expect to hear this. She lowered her eyes and fell into deep thought. After a long time, she said softly, "Maybe it's because I am a very complicated person, and you are a very simple person. No, you are a very simple person, but you want to do very complicated things." Shula's hand was holding the railing, and he felt that the railing was as cold as ice. He withdrew his hand and exhaled. He asked, "What is your secret?" Zhong Xiaoming was silent for a long time. She said, "A year ago, I was doing voluntary support work in the office of Senator Medellin in S2. I know that. There are many young people in the Federation who go to the 4 states to do this kind of work." Shula said, "You are back, and the government has determined that you are a returnee. This shouldn't be a problem. The problem is, until today, I am still working for Senator Medellin." Zhong Xiaoming suddenly smiled, but her smile was cold. After hearing Zhong Xiaoming's true identity, Shula fell silent. After a long time, he said softly, "And then? Although I have not received professional espionage training, what I do is actually not much different from a spy." Zhong Xiaoming lowered her head and looked at the heavy backpack by her feet. She said, "I came back to Yue University for only one purpose, and that is to get close to Tai Jiyuan and help the senator establish some kind of direct connection with him." "And then?" Zhong Xiaoming looked at him with slight surprise. She continued, "Other than the Double Moon Festival Ball, I have no other way to get close to the mysterious heir of the Tai family." "Oh, right, you might not know his true identity yet." Shula shook his head and stopped this question. He asked calmly, "And then?" No matter what Zhong Xiaoming said, Shula only replied with 3 words, "And then?" Zhong Xiaoming looked at him quietly. She took off a pink cotton glove from her hand and put it on his hand. She lowered her head and said softly, "You don't seem surprised at all, and you don't seem angry. Actually, the number of strange things I've encountered in my life is more than you can imagine." Shula put on the glove on his left hand, and his right hand naturally held her hand. He looked at her and said seriously, "I just don't understand what these things have to do with what happened between us." "I am a spy." Zhong Xiaoming looked at him seriously. She didn't understand and said, "Are you not afraid at all?" Shula muttered a few words in annoyance. He thought to himself, "I'm still a fugitive." He sighed and shook his head. He gently parted Zhong Xiaoming's hair under her cap. He looked at her smooth forehead and said with pity, "If this is your secret. I guessed it a long time ago, but I didn't think that the truth I guessed was the truth." Zhong Xiaoming laughed bitterly. She turned her head and looked at the sky outside the railings. She said, "I know I hurt you, and I shouldn't have said these things. But if I don't explain it to you, I will feel very bad. You wanted to get close to Tai Jiyuan, so you left me." Shula helped her organize the messy information. After a moment of silence, he said, And now you realize that I know Tai Ji-yuan. If you wanted to get close to him, it would have been more convenient for you to stay by my side. You didn't look for me for so many days. It is clear that you don't want to look back. If I were to return to you under these circumstances, it would be an insult to both of us. Zhong Xiaoming let go of his hand and held her face. Her face was full of relief and determination. I won't let myself do such a thing. Shu Le's mood was slightly better. You once asked me what I thought of George Carlin's theory and the people in S2. I once said that I sympathized with them and was willing to support them, but I don't understand. Is it because you are willing to sacrifice something, you can sacrifice the love between us? Zhong Xiaoming's nose wrinkled in distress. She sighed and said, maybe you think it is funny, but it is my belief. And I will definitely return to S2 in the future. Your dream is to be the chief engineer of the Shell Motor Company. The two of us don't have a future to begin with. Let's not talk about the future. Let's talk about the present. You are here today. It seems that the people you serve have new requirements for you. Shu Le's eyes narrowed. He said mockingly, I respect any belief, but a belief that requires one to sacrifice one's feelings and betray one's feelings. In my opinion, it is a disgusting thing. Zhong Xiaoming felt his anger. She silently changed the topic. The pressure on S2 is too great. The soldiers and workers living in the mountains are about to be attacked by the federal military, and the only ones who can change the will of the Federation government are those big families. Tai Ji-yuan is the heir of the Tai family, one of the 7 big families. If Senator Macklin can gain his trust, he will be able to help the people in the mountains get through these difficult times. In your opinion, I betrayed the feelings between us for some illusory belief. But in reality, I am doing this for the sake of those fresh lives. After a long silence, Shu Le said, I haven't seen Tai Ji-yuan for many days. I may not be able to help you on your side. I just want to confess everything to you. Zhong Xiaoming looked at him. Her eyes were filled with tears. Shu Le took her into his arms. His hands slipped into her brown windbreaker. Sticking close to her soft and warm body, he hugged her tightly and refused to let go. He sniffed the faint fragrance around her neck and said, You are my first woman. Zhong Xiaoming leaned into his arms and said, You are my first man. I like you. I like you too. Are you really going to leave me? Yes. Then what is it between us? What was that night? Was it charity for a poor man like me before he died? Shu Le's voice suddenly became angry. Zhong Xiaoming lowered her head and held his chin like a kitten. She said faintly, Just think of it as charity for me. Maybe then you won't be so unhappy. Have you ever thought that those big shots who play politics are just using you? Have you ever thought that you're just a girl who doesn't know anything? You're very childish. Shu Le stood up straight, forgetting that she was still a young girl who wasn't even 20 yet. She looked into Zhong Xiaoming's eyes with melancholy. Zhong Xiaoming smiled, but tears began to flash in her eyes. Her nasal voice was very strong. She said with a sniffling voice, I am still young. I have to be childish while I can. At this moment, Shu Le knew that he couldn't persuade her to leave that strange world. He vaguely understood the philosophy and thoughts of some people in this world. At this moment, he began to understand this girl's stubbornness and began to feel the sadness that came early. Chapter 112. After the fireworks bloomed, Shu Le and Zhong Xiaoming walked down the Iron Tower. The stairs were so long, but the two of them hoped it would be longer. Just as the New Year bell rang, they warmed each other and held hands like a real couple. They strolled along the bustling streets of Linhai, not thinking about anything. When they walked in front of the big holographic screen at the intersection of the city center with freshly baked bread in hand, it was the last-minute countdown of the 66th year of the constitutional calendar. There was a sea of people at the intersection of the street. Young people with excited and praying expressions were watching the constantly changing numbers on the holographic screen. Shu Le smiled. He glanced at Zhong Xiaoming in his arms and said, See? Actually, most people's lives are normal and full like this. The crowd was crowded, and the chill of winter was forced back. Zhong Xiaoming, whose cheeks were slightly red, took off her hat and said, but we can't always just look at the surface. The two of them were silent in the sea of people, quietly cuddling together. It was strange to say that this young man and woman were used to being silent in front of others. Only when they were together did they seem to have more words and expressions. 10, 9, 8, 7. As the numbers on the huge screen changed, the people in the square at the crossroads began to loudly count down. Their voices became louder and louder, more and more orderly, shaking the two bright moons in the sky. 3, 2, 1. The numbers finally reached 0, and the 66th year of the constitutional era took its last step. The second hand of the new year welcomed the cheers of countless people and ribbons in the square. Happy New Year! Happy New Year 67. People happily waved the scarves and hats in their hands and blew the trumpets to add noise to the New Year's atmosphere. Their companions began to hug each other, and the young men took advantage of the New Year's atmosphere to bravely hug the girls they didn't know. Zhong Xiaoming held back her laughter as she was dragged away by Shula away from this noisy and dangerous area. At certain moments, the possessiveness and jealousy displayed by young men would be extremely cute, making a girl's heart feel sweet. However, that trace of sweetness turned into calmness and disappointment in an instant. She looked at Shula and said, "My mission has failed, so it's also over. There's no meaning in staying in your university anymore. I'll probably return to S2 the day after tomorrow." Shula remained silent. He didn't say anything like waiting for her. After this parting, he didn't know when they would meet again. He also didn't try to keep her. The situation in the 4 prefectures was too critical. She had to return to the place she missed and fight with those strangers. Be careful. He lowered his head and put the glove back on her hand. He gently held it and then gave her a New Year's hug. Suddenly, his gaze moved from Zhong Xiaoming's shoulder to the hologram screen in confusion. This was because he discovered that the face of Jian Shueya, who was doing the New Year's greeting on the Federation TV station, had suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a very familiar news anchor. At the same time, Shula wasn't the only one who noticed the change in the hologram screen. The people in the square at the end of the street also looked at the hologram screen in confusion. The female news anchor's expression was slightly flustered. She said, "Now, we'll broadcast a piece of news that our station has just received." After saying this, the good news anchor immediately calmed down. A piece of news from a reliable source has confirmed, the Federation TV station's news often had a break in breaking news, but on this special occasion of the new year, it was undoubtedly a very important thing to do. The people in the square at the end of the street quieted down. They looked at the huge hologram screen with a trace of uneasiness and listened to the female news anchor's voice in the air. The female news anchor's voice was a bit hurried, but there was an unconcealable joy between her eyebrows. The people in the Federation who were watching this news immediately felt relieved. It seemed that the president was not assassinated, nor was it the Empire taking advantage of the Federation's new year to launch a brazen invasion. Then what kind of good news would make the Federation TV station's director make the decision to break in the broadcast at the first possible moment? Just half an hour ago, the Federation Management Committee member Mr. Parbray's transport plane has landed at the Green Dragon Mountain Airport in Region S2. The Green Dragon Mountain Airport is the only air passage between Green Dragon Mountain and the outside world. Currently, it is still under the control of the anti-government forces. The following is the image that our station has just received. The people in the square at the end of the street looked at the hologram screen in disbelief. They saw a tall man wearing a grey windbreaker, under the protection of several aides, walking down the gangway of a shabby transport plane. And below the transport plane, several leaders of the anti-government forces greeted him with a serious expression. The tall man's face was a bit dark, the lines of his face were as sharp as a knife, showing this person's resolute character. His lips were a bit thick. He was the rising political star of the Federation in the past 2 years, Member Parbray, who was deeply supported by the majority of the middle and lower class people. In the news image on the hologram screen, Member Parbray's broad right hand and the hand of the leader of the anti-government forces were tightly clasped together. At the same time, the Federation TV station's news anchor's voiceover continued to sound. "We don't know when Member Parbray left the Capital Special District and went to the Green Dragon Mountain military area, but according to the press release sent by the member's office, Member Parbray's trip was invited by the anti-government forces leader Nanshui to negotiate a settlement agreement. According to the latest news, the two sides have reached an agreement on the specific details of the agreement. Within the next 48 hours, the anti-government forces will fully withdraw from the 4 states around the mountain, maintaining an effective zone of peace between them and the government forces. Member Parbray's office has publicly called for the government and the military to maintain a restrained attitude before the settlement agreement is signed. At the same time, they said that the specific provisions of the settlement agreement will be sent to the Management Committee and the President's office in the shortest time possible. Member Parbray believes that this settlement agreement will certainly satisfy the dignity and demands of all parties. According to our station's reporters in the 4 states, before 8 o'clock last night, the anti-government forces had already begun to withdraw, but no one expected that this was to welcome Member Parbray's sudden visit. According to analysts, the reason why Member Parbray's office showed such confidence in the press release is because the member has already obtained some kind of promise from the leader of the anti-government forces, Nanshui. The anti-government forces will make great concessions in the negotiations and accept the 3 key conditions put forward by the government. The crowd in the square at the end of the street, who had been quietly listening to the news, finally burst into cheers at this time. Whether it was from the news or from Member Medellin's busy lobbying activities, the people of the Federation guessed that the military operation in Region S2 was about to begin, and that a civil war was about to break out. This fact cast a shadow over the new year. However, just after the new year, Member Parbray, who took the risk to travel to the anti-government forces area on a transport plane, brought such a big surprise to the people that they couldn't help but cheer. The President's press release has just responded by welcoming the peaceful intentions shown by the anti-government forces at the arrival of the new year. At the same time, they are grateful to Member Parbray for his tireless efforts for peace, and are grateful to Member Parbray for taking the risk to personally travel to the mountain area. However, the press release also said that Mr. President is temporarily unable to understand the specific contents of the agreement, so he is unable to make a specific evaluation. The Management Committee has temporarily maintained silence. A liaison officer of the member's office, who is willing to be named, expressed doubts about the true purpose of Member Parbray's trip. He also insisted that the action without the authorization of the President and the Management Committee is not legal, and that the legendary reconciliation agreement actually has no legal effect. The crowd in the square let out a series of extremely harsh boos. At this time, if the Federation Management Committee dared to pour cold water on this hard-won peace process, it would only cause the dissatisfaction of all the people of the Federation. The official dared not reveal his identity. It was obvious that he was a member who was unwilling to serve him. In the next election, he would be mercilessly abandoned by the angry people. The news footage on the hologram changed to the image of the withdrawal of the anti-government forces that the television station had just received. The anti-government forces wearing dark military uniforms were methodically sitting in armored vehicles, along the rugged mountain road, and retreating into the deep mountains and forests. Immediately after, the news anchor's voice sounded again. The Ministry of Defense still has not officially responded. According to analysts, the federal military has been preparing for the spring offensive for as long as 2 years. It is impossible for them to slow down the pace of preparation for war because of the reconciliation agreement reached by Member Parbray alone with the anti-government forces. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense, citing that today is a public holiday, rejected our request for an interview. When she said this, the female anchor's expression was very serious, but her voice deliberately paused. It was obvious that she wanted to use the ridiculous excuse of the Ministry of Defense to be booed by all the people of the Federation. General Zhu Yingxing, the Deputy Director of Logistics of the Ministry of Defense, said in his personal capacity during an interview with our station. As a loyal soldier of the Federation, he will firmly carry out every order of Mr. President and the Management Committee. However, he is more willing to let the mechas and bullets of the Federal Army pour down on the land of the Empire people. He is very optimistic about the future prospects of this reconciliation agreement. All the signs show that Senator Prabble's adventure has already borne a lot of fruit. Peace may come, but civil war may not start. The female anchor on the hologram looked at the camera and said with a smile, "Without a doubt, this is the best New Year's gift that Member Parbre has given to all the people of the Federation in the 67th year of the constitutional calendar." Hearing the cheers around him, and hearing the voice of Member Parbre, Shula retracted his gaze from the hologram. He couldn't believe his ears and laughed happily. He looked at Zhong Xiaoming beside him and said, "It looks like you don't have to rush back." Zhong Xiaoming looked at the images on the hologram in disbelief. She asked in surprise and doubt, why wasn't there any news beforehand? The Member of Parliament doesn't seem to know either. Right at this moment, Shula's phone rang. A familiar voice that he hadn't heard for a long time came from the other end of the phone. That voice was full of fatigue and faint satisfaction. "My work is done. Where are you? Have a drink with me." Chapter 113. The bar was full of people celebrating the new year. Stimulated by the alcohol and the good news that had just been broadcasted on the news, people were talking loudly about something and toasting people they didn't know. Shula struggled to walk to a quiet corner of the bar. When he saw the 2 empty bottles of hard liquor in front of Shi Qinghai, he couldn't help but shake his head. Shi Qinghai was still wearing his wrinkled suit, and his whole body was emitting a sour smell. There was nothing on the table except for a few bottles of amber hard liquor, 2 wine glasses, and a bucket of ice. "Zhong Xiaoming didn't come with you?" Shi Qinghai lazily opened his eyes. Although he had already downed 2 bottles of hard liquor, the eyes of this yuppie-looking official from the Bureau of Investigation were still clear and bright, without a trace of drunkenness. Shula admired Shi Qinghai's alcohol tolerance the most. He sighed and poured himself a thin layer of alcohol, but added 7 ice cubes. He replied, "She had a party at home today, so she went back first." In fact, Zhong Xiaoming didn't want to go back to that stale home where she only knew how to socialize in high society. However, she had confessed to Shula that she was a spy, so naturally, Shula wouldn't bring her to meet Shi Qinghai. After all, Shi Qinghai was an official from the Bureau of Investigation of the Federation. Thinking of Zhong Xiaoming, Shula's expression gradually froze. He couldn't completely understand what was on the girl's mind. "We haven't seen each other for a few days. Why did that woman come back to you?" Shi Qinghai saw his expression and frowned. When he found out that Zhong Xiaoming and Shula were together over the phone, he immediately guessed that it was related to Senator Macklin. Thinking that the female student might want to get close to Tai Jiyuan by returning to Shula, he couldn't hide the disgust in his heart. He said coldly, "Did you forget what happened before the ball?" Shula smiled honestly. Although he couldn't guess what Shi Qinghai was worried about, he could tell that he was concerned about him. He avoided the question and said, "Let's talk about you. What kind of secret mission made you leave for so long? I went to the 4th department to look for you, but even your staff members didn't know where you were." "Well, since it's a secret mission, of course those little bastards wouldn't know." Shi Qinghai raised his eyebrows and said proudly, "Nominally, I just took a 2-month leave and went to the tropical south for a vacation." "Since that's the case, of course, you can't tell me about the mission," Shula Lu said. Shi Qinghai shrugged and silently agreed. He lay on the sofa comfortably and drank while watching the TV in the bar. The TV screen was still repeating the breaking news. On the screen, Councillor Pavel looked very calm as he walked up the gangway. The wind in the S2 Green Dragon Mountain area made his windbreaker flutter in the wind. Shi Qinghai looked at the screen and pursed his thin lips. He narrowed his eyes and fell into deep thought. In the past few days, he had been very busy. The communication between the Tai family and the anti-government army was all done by him alone. He had to negotiate the conditions, send the information back and forth, and clash of wills. It was very tiring for him. The second-in-command of the anti-government army had left Linhai a long time ago, so he had to do everything by himself. He used a secret channel and devoted himself to this shocking behind-the-scenes deal. Not only did he have to avoid the attention of the Federation government, but he also had to avoid the surveillance of the Tai family. The pressure was as heavy as a mountain. It was so heavy that he almost couldn't breathe, and he didn't even have time to take a shower. Now that everything was over, and both parties had reached an agreement, The past few days of hard work and tension seemed to have exchanged for a good result. Looking at Senator Parbray, whose face was as dark as iron, on the screen, he suddenly felt a little exhausted. "Did you know? This guy who looks like a rock on the screen will become our president next year." Shi Qinghai put down his wine glass and lit a cigarette. He took a deep breath and sighed in satisfaction. He bitterly added in his heart, "At least before this guy is officially elected president, I should be safe in the Federation." Looking at Senator Parbray shaking hands with the leader of the anti-government army on the screen, Shi Qinghai was amazed by the influence of the Tai family in the Federation. Choosing to make Parbray appear in front of all the Federation citizens during the new year in the form of a breaking news event, it had to be said that this was a way to maximize the benefits. But the key was that the Tai family had to have this kind of control over the media, as well as the ability to judge the countless factions within the Federation government. Only then could this news event catch everyone off guard. If the citizens of the Federation could really get rid of the shadow of the Civil War, then they would definitely remember for a very long time that when everyone was celebrating the new year, a distinguished senator of the Federation took a great risk and secretly went to the mountainous area controlled by the anti-government army, and reached a peace agreement with the anti-government army. From today onwards, it would be very difficult for people to forget the moment when Senator Parbray, wearing a trench coat, walked down the gangway of the transport aircraft with a calm expression. "It's this year." Shula reminded Shi Qinghai that it was already past 12 o'clock. He shook his head and said, "Although I also like Senator Parbray very much, the political aspect is too far away from us. I don't know if he can successfully get elected. Trust me, he is already the president." Shi Qinghai smiled a little tiredly. He thought to himself that if Senator Parbray still couldn't grasp this opportunity under such a wave of public opinion, then it could only mean that the higher-ups in the organization and the Tai family had all misjudged him at the same time. At the same time, he also thought that the ordinary citizens of the Federation only saw this scene on the news today, but they didn't know that in order for this to happen on time on the new year, the two parties involved in this incident had secretly negotiated many times. In the end, they were able to sign the agreement in the end. The ordinary citizens also didn't know how much inside information was hidden behind this seemingly legendary senator's journey of reconciliation. Shi Qinghai knew all of these inside information because he was the person involved. He quietly looked at Shu Le and thought about the conversation at the Double Moon Festival ball. He thought about how his good friend in front of him would probably never know about the important role he played in this incident, and he couldn't help but smile slightly. After stuffing out the cigarette, Shi Qinghai raised his wine glass and said to Shu Le, "To the peace of the Federation." Shu Le raised his wine glass and replied with a smile, "To our future president." Shi Qinghai downed the strong wine in one gulp, and a strange smile appeared on his face. "Yes, to our president." The busy workers had already left, and the light screen connected by the optical fiber had also been dismantled and was ready to be transported away. Tai Jiyuan stood on the second floor and looked down at the empty hall, but it was as if he could still see the computer light screen that displayed the important information of the major forces of the Federation, and the workers who were responsible for determining the specific links and analyzing the reactions of all parties after the incident. This was a villa on the outskirts of Linhai, and it was the property of the Tai family. In the past few days, this villa had become a temporary decision-making room, specifically responsible for dealing with the negotiations with the S2 anti-government army. In the past few days, the light screen was always on, and the workers were always busy, walking as if they were running. Tai Jiyuan's lips slightly curved, and he smiled. After the coming-of-age ceremony, he finally had full authority. For the first time, he truly began to independently handle a major event that could affect the entire Federation. Under the close supervision of Lady Tai, with the help of countless workers from the family, and after many days of exhaustion, he was finally satisfied to see that his work had a good result. He only saw the news on the light screen once, but he saw the news 4 minutes before anyone in the Federation, and even the president. This was because this piece of news had passed his review and was sent to the news department of the Federal Television Station. The Federation TV station was the national TV station, and no company, no tycoon, not even the legendary 7 families had the ability to completely control it. But countless forces would try to reach out their hands in the Federation TV station. And the Thai family, who had always been low-key and steady, was the most important news department of the Federation TV station, and had the most powerful influence. Tai Ji-yuan held the railing with both hands, and recalled the scene in his mind. He was very satisfied with Mr. Parbray's performance in front of the camera. He believed that in the near future, Mr. Parbray's campaign office would definitely choose that scene as the most important poster cover, and paste it all over the Federation streets, to win him countless votes. Thinking about this, the youth couldn't help but smile, and he was very satisfied with his work these past few days. Tai Ji-yuan sighed and said, "What's my schedule for tomorrow?" Chapter 114. Does anyone know my itinerary for the next day? No. Tai Ji-yuan looked at Steward Jin and said with a smile, "If that's the case, where is the danger coming from?" According to the internal analysis of the Federation Investigation Bureau, under the current circumstances, the families supporting the presidential candidates should be angry enough with the young master. It's all just speculation. Tai Ji-yuan said, "In a few months' time, I'll be leaving Ua University and heading to the Westwoods for military service. Don't tell me you still expect me to be surrounded by bodyguards from my family while I'm in the military camp." On the first day of the 67th year of the constitutional calendar, the snowstorm in Linhai University town raged as usual, covering the entire large city group in snow and ice. Families celebrating the new year were happily shopping on the streets, while students who lived alone in other places were more used to hiding under the warm blankets of their apartments and playing games. However, this habit was broken by a concert this year. All the major campuses were quiet, but the comprehensive gymnasium by the Rose River in the northwest corner of the university town was bustling with noise and excitement. Shula brushed off the snow on his body and took a deep breath. He raised his head and looked at the huge hologram above the gymnasium. Looking at the familiar purple-haired girl's radiant face on the hologram, he couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. Back in the Donglin region, orphans like them could only stare at the Jian Shueya on the TV screen and shout unrealistic slogans. Who would have thought that in this lifetime, there would be a day when they could see Jian Shueya with their own eyes on the capital ring? Jian Shueya was a superstar in the Federation. Perhaps using the term superstar was a bit inappropriate, because there were as many stars in the Federation as there were stars in the sky, but stars like Jian Shueya were extremely rare. It should be said that this purple-haired girl, who was not yet 18 years old, had quickly occupied the hearts of all the Federation citizens from the day she appeared on Channel 23 of the Federation. Whether it was her sometimes playful and sometimes soft purple hair, her large eyes that seemed to speak, or the warship commander uniform she wore in the TV series from various historical periods, she had become the favorite topic of conversation among the Federation citizens in the past few years. Whenever Shula thought of Jian Shueya, he also felt that this girl was a true legend. It was said that Jian Shueya's parents died when she was young, and because of a coincidence, she walked onto the Federation's television screen. At that time, she was only playing the role of an adopted orphan in a long-lived family comedy. At that time, Jian Shueya was not yet 12 years old. Her pair of watery eyes revealed the pitiful expression of a little rabbit, and that youthful and adorable face would flash a cheerful smile from time to time. In just one night, she had defeated all the Federation citizens who were born with a natural tendency to pity the weak. This long-lived family comedy ended after 6 years. Although Jian Shueya only participated in the last 1.5 years, the character she played, who was sometimes weak and sometimes strong like an adult, became the most popular character in this comedy. Channel 23 of the Federation television station very cleverly grasped the public's preferences. 1.5 months later, they released the intergalactic TV series Full Metal Rush, which had been running until today. This TV series depicted the entire course of a female Federation warship commander, from her entrance into the military academy, to her internship, and finally her participation in the war against the Empire. The scriptwriter's skill was extraordinary, successfully portraying a female lead who had the wisdom and composure of an adult, but at the same time also had the charm of a young girl. This female lead was naturally played by Jian Shueya. As soon as this TV series was released, It immediately received an unprecedented response. It successfully broke the viewership ratings record of all the Federation television stations except for the news channel. And the little girl who dyed her hair purple became one of the Federation's leading idols. At present, the plot of this TV series had just reached the point where the Enterprise led by Colonel Jen Shueya had broken through the debris flow and was about to arrive at the Great District of Siling. If this trend continued, perhaps they would really have to film according to Jen Shueya's age until she had gone through her entire adolescence and stepped into true adulthood. The TV station chief was not in a hurry, and the audience of the Federation was not in a hurry either. They watched the birth of a legend in the history of television, and there was only joy in their hearts. A star who starred in a TV series at the age of 11 and a half, who became famous throughout the universe at the age of 14, and who began to bear the pressure of advertising on the Federation television station, could definitely be called a legend. What was even more legendary was the incident that happened in the 64th year of the constitutional era. The angry Children's Rights Protection Fund, after failing to negotiate with the TV station, sued the Federation television station, as well as the department in charge of the TV station, the Radio Management Committee of the President's Office, to the court. The foundation believed that the Federation television station, as a public property, had ignored the rights of children and continuously squeezed Jen Shueya's rest and learning time. This was unacceptable. And Jen Shueya's popularity in the Federation would bring about a very bad trend, which would make the Federation government neglect the protection of children's rights. This lawsuit caused a stir in the Federation for a while, and the matter became more and more serious. It went from the court of first instance to the local circuit court, and finally to the Supreme Court. The two sides of the lawsuit were still arguing non-stop. Public opinion remained silent on this matter, because the public of the Federation could not stand firm on this matter. Those who were busy with work during the day were most used to watching the incomparably cute little girl on the holographic screen when they returned home. And their pity for Jen Shueya came from the bottom of their hearts. They did not want this little girl to be so busy filming every day that she did not have her own life. The lawsuit became more and more serious, and the Children's Rights Protection Fund, which had a strong background, kept expanding the list of defendants. The Federation television station, the satellite service provider, and even the BD Zhuangchen Viewership Survey Agency were all defendants in this lawsuit. In the end, the foundation even sued two members of the Federation who were in charge of reviewing the content of the TV station. The director of the President's Office, who publicly said that Jen Shueya should be allowed to choose her own content, was naturally not spared. The climax of this dispute in the Supreme Court was in the autumn of the 64th year of the constitutional calendar, when Jen Shueya personally appeared in court to defend herself. In the solemn court, Jen Shueya, who was dressed in plain clothes, adorably rubbed her fluffy purple hair and said to the live broadcast camera, "I am very grateful for the efforts that the Foundation has made for me. I also understand that the Foundation is worried that the rights of minors will not be fully protected, even without any preconditions, but I just want to say that all the decisions that I have made are my own, and I like them." The three words "I like them" seemed simple, but it expressed the attitude of the number one star of the Federation. The Children's Rights Protection Fund still did not give up. They requested that the agreement be ruled invalid on the grounds that Jen Shueya was not yet 14 years old when she signed the contract with the Federation television station, and that there was no legal guardian's signature on the agreement. At this time, the chief judge of the Federation, who was already 79 years old and had a head of white hair, glared fiercely at the lawyer representing the Foundation. He waved the thin pieces of paper in his hand and said, "In my hand is Jen Shueya's report card for this year. All of them are A+. I also have countless materials that can prove that acting in the TV series did not affect her studies. I know the results of Jen Shueya's IQ test, but I will not tell you." The chief judge of the Federation looked like an old child. He smiled and looked at the cameras in the court and the stunned lawyers. "I just want to say that a child like her, no matter what career she chooses in the future, will make great contributions to the Federation. But since she has chosen to fill the spiritual life of the people of the Federation, as an old man, I can only show respect." The lawyer of the Foundation raised his hand to signal for him to speak. Chief Judge He Ying waved his hand in annoyance and said, "She is not yet 14 years old, so the legal documents she signed are indeed useless. But this legal document, I recognize its usefulness, because she is Jen Shueya. The long-lasting and influential lawsuit became the best news material for the Federation television station news channel, except for the Civil War. The final result of the lawsuit, especially the last sentence of the chief judge of the Federation, made Jen Shueya's position in the hearts of the Federation citizens even higher. At that time, there was a very interesting phenomenon. The two channels with the highest ratings in the entire Federation were broadcasting Jen Shueya. It was just that Channel 23 was broadcasting the TV series she acted in, while the news channel was broadcasting the strange lawsuit about her. The two channels relied on Jen Shueya and kept fighting in the ring, which was considered interesting for a while. But who can say that the lawsuit was not more exciting than the TV series? Today was the release of Jen Shueya's new song as well as her first solo concert. Except for the ending song of the TV series, Jen Shueya had never sung a song. Today's new song release was not in the capital special district, nor in the largest city in S1. Instead, it was in Linhai University City. This made the officials and people of Linhai feel extremely proud. Just by looking at the expensive transportation outside the hall, one would know that many state legislators came with their families to watch today. Shula took out the ticket in his pocket and walked into the hall. His expression was calm, but there was a strange feeling in his heart. For the people of Donglin, the superstar of the Federation, Jen Shueya, was definitely not as simple as an idol. After the industrial decline, the citizens of Donglin, who relied on the welfare of the Federation to barely survive, were used to seeing Jen Shueya's face every day in their boring lives. After a long period of companionship, the people of Donglin felt that Jen Shueya was not a distant and unreachable star, but more like their little sister next door. Day after day, she accompanied them at dinner time, their coffee time, their drunken time. Habit was a very powerful force that subtly conquered the lives of the people of Donglin. Habit was a kind of love. Perhaps it was not the kind of love between a man and a woman, but it was still love. Chapter 115. According to the symbol on the ticket, Shula came to a special passage. The passage was very quiet, which made him feel slightly uneasy. The beautiful lady who checked the ticket scanned the barcode of his ticket, and then checked the first layer of his microchip identity. Her face showed a trace of surprise, and then she smiled and welcomed him in. This location is better than the mayor's and Councilman High's box. I wonder who he is. He must be a weirdo. He's dressed so shabbily. Who can tell he's a big shot? Shula had been cultivating the power in his body for the past few years, so his hearing was better than the average person. Even after walking for more than 10 meters, he could still hear the discussion of the girls who checked the tickets behind him. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It was snowing and windy today, but he was still wearing that old military trench coat and holding a VIP ticket in his hand. It was indeed a bit strange. He immediately remembered that this ticket was given to him by Tai Ji-yuan. When he thought about how he had somehow gotten to know the successor of a big family, his feelings became more and more complicated. Outside the best individual box above the main stage of the stadium, Shula was stopped by the agents in black suits. They carefully checked him, and after confirming that there were no problems, they let him in. Shula didn't feel any dissatisfaction in his heart. He knew that if he were to enter the box and stay with that kid, he would definitely be constantly checked. The only thing that puzzled him was that he clearly had that exquisite stun baton hidden in his boots. Why did the agent check his feet unintentionally miss it? Pushing open the heavy wooden door of the private room, a light floral fragrance wafted out. It wasn't cloying at all. Shula's spirits were lifted as he looked at the large pot of thousand-star flowers by the floor-to-ceiling window. He saw a skinny youth with a slightly pale complexion standing beside the flower tree that was about as tall as a person. That's right. Although Shula already knew about Meng Zhiyuan's family background and knew that he was one of the people standing at the top of the Federation, which had a population of tens of billions, when they met again after a few days, Shula still subconsciously thought of Meng Zhiyuan as that pitiful guy who had fainted in his arms and used indifference and calmness to hide his fondness for commoner food. I was wondering if you would come. Tai Ji-yuan turned around, smiled at Shu, and said, "This ticket is my thank you gift. If you don't accept it, I will be disappointed. Since you gave it to me, of course I will come. Also, I said through the communication device that I have liked Jen Shueya since I was young." Shu walked over to him, and raised his knife-like eyebrows. He knew very well that this young man in front of him was not an ordinary person, and would not interact with him like a normal friend. This was because in front of others, the other would always naturally reveal that kind of aura. However, he tried to treat the other like a normal person, because he believed that this was how friends should interact, if the two of them could become true friends in the future. Tai Ji-yuan was not surprised to hear Shu answer him like this, because he knew what kind of person Shu was. The corners of his lips curled up, and he quite admired how the other was still so stubborn in front of him. He smiled and said, "Jen Shueya is younger than you. If she heard what you said, she would definitely be so sad that she would not be able to eat." Shu walked to his side, sniffing the fragrance of the 1,000-star flowers. He looked at the empty stage not far below the floor-to-ceiling glass, and suddenly thought of something. He asked hesitantly, "Do you know Jen Shueya?" Although Jen Shueya was the most popular star in the Federation, with Tai Ji-yuan's status as the heir of one of the 7 great families, it should not be difficult for him to get to know her. Tai Ji-yuan shook his head. "I've been transferring schools all these years since she debuted, so how could I know her? But I've seen a few of her TV shows, and she really is a very cute little girl." For him, there were no stars in the world that were worth being infatuated with. In his position, he would look at everything with an appreciative gaze, but he would never be as emotionally invested as Shu. Perhaps this in itself was a kind of tragedy. Shu smiled and said, "That's good. I was quite worried that I would hear the bloody and teary history of these stars from the mouths of big shots like you. You can't imagine how big of a blow it is to people like us when our idols are disillusioned. You think too much." Tai Ji-yuan could hear the hidden meaning in Shu's words. He laughed and said, "We're not crocodiles that eat people without spitting out the bones. You don't have to always think of us in the dark. Of course, I won't deny that some people like to use celebrities as a symbol of their strength. But, those people don't include me," he added in his heart. Moreover, no one would dare to use Jen Shueya as a symbol of their strength, unless those rich young masters were really tired of living. After butler Jin arranged the food and drinks, he bowed to the two of them and left the luxurious private room. At this time, only the 2 young people were left in the private room. The atmosphere of the conversation suddenly became much more relaxed, and it was more like they were back in the H1 lounge. However, the conversation did not start for long before it came to an abrupt end. This was because Shu's eyes suddenly froze, and it was as if the wind and snow outside the gymnasium had frozen into 2 icicles. He did not blink and did not move as he stared blankly below the floor-to-ceiling window. The gymnasium was dark. There was only a stage, and there was only one person on the stage. A purple-haired girl under the age of 18 walked out of the darkness and bathed in the light. The music started. This luxurious private room was directly facing the large holographic screen of the gymnasium, and it was not far from the stage. It was the best position to watch the concert. There was no need for binoculars to clearly see the beautiful and cute face of the purple-haired girl on the holographic screen. The voice input alone made it so that the room could hear the most vivid voice of Jen Shueya. However, Shu still stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in a daze, looking at the distant figure on the stage. He watched as she changed into her costume, watched as she introduced her new song with some difficulty, and watched as she, who should have only existed in his imagination, appeared in front of his eyes. Far away on the horizon, but right in front of his eyes. He did not know how long he had been standing there. Who knew how many times those melodies songs had been played, but Shu's posture did not change at all. Tai Ji-yuan had long lost his patience to keep him company. He sat back down on the comfortable sofa, picked up a glass of low-alcohol wine and sipped slowly. His gaze would occasionally glance at Jen Shueya's face on the holographic screen outside the window, and occasionally close his eyes to listen carefully to the first sounds of this most popular celebrity of the Federation. However, most of the time, his gaze would fall thoughtfully on Shu, who was standing by the window. He believed that he knew very well what kind of person Shula was. He was calm, passionate, sincere, and upright. He was not greedy for vanity, and had an innate aversion to seeking connections with the rich and powerful. He was a fellow who was quite lucky to have caught the eye of Professor Jin. This fellow had a talent in mecha that Tai Ji-yuan still could not understand, but he was exceptionally low-key. However, at this moment, as he stared at Shula's back, Tai Ji-yuan suddenly found that he could not quite see through this fellow. Why would a young man who had to work so hard to maintain his dignity and composure in front of him lose his composure like this in front of a female celebrity that only young men and women would be madly infatuated with? No, this was not losing his composure, this was a state where he was completely immersed in the performance, forgetting everything else around him. Tai Ji-yuan's brow furrowed slightly, especially when his sharp eyes noticed that Shula's eyes seemed to be a little bright in the reflection of the full-length window. As if they were wet, he could no longer control his surprise. He stood up and walked over to the window. Shula stared silently at that incomparably familiar yet incomparably unfamiliar purple-haired girl on the stage below the window. Watching her release her charms like a goddess under the lights, he felt his entire body stiffen. His fingers resting on the full-length window were somewhat numb, and his heart was beating much faster. In the instant that Jen Shueya had appeared on the stage, Shula had thought of a proverb from the Federation: when a dream becomes reality and appears before people, people will always treat this reality as a dream. At first glance, Shula had felt that the purple-haired girl on the stage was not real at all, that she was someone who only existed in his dreams. He felt that everything that was happening now was just a dream. He thought that his disobedient stiff body and slightly numb fingers were all because of this reason that he could not wake up. However, following the sound of the song, Shula woke up. He knew that he was in the luxurious box of the Capital Ring Stadium, not outside the coffee shop on Donglin's Bell Tower Street, and not at the top of an abandoned mine. As the song progressed, Shula gradually calmed down, but he still stared blankly at Jen Shueya on the stage, his eyes unblinking. He didn't know how many songs she sang, or what song she sang, but he just quietly listened and quietly watched until his eyes gradually became moist. A few years ago, under the green tree in the suburbs of Hushi Province's capital, he had once cried to Jen Shueya on the hologram screen, saying that he would take her as his wife. But he knew that the tears at that time were only caused by the fatigue of the muscles in his eyes from staring at the components for a long time in the mine's operation room. But now, he really felt very sour in his heart, and had the urge to cry. He finally understood why he had always liked Jen Shueya so much. Even after escaping to S1 Linhai University town, he still did not stop loving that purple-haired girl. It turned out that it was not as simple as liking her. Outside the coffee shop on Bell Tower Street, he, Li Wei, and the group of orphans were laughing and joking as they watched her. On the street, orphans wearing tattered black clothes were laughing and shouting slogans that they wanted to see her. Above the mine, under the dusky twilight of Donglin, he and the uncle held a glass of red wine and silently watched her. To him, Jen Shueya was not a character that only existed on the hologram screen. She was an idol that was popular throughout the Federation. More than that, she was his memories. Those monotonous but fulfilling memories of his time in Donglin. And now, he was a fugitive from the Federation. He was a completely different person. The days in Donglin could never go back. At this moment, Shula thought of Uncle Fengyu, thought of Li Wei and Chongzi, whose whereabouts were unknown, thought of the people in Hushi Province. His heart was calm and incomparably sour. What's wrong? Tai Ji-yuan walked to his side and asked with a frown. Chapter 116. The moment he saw Jen Shueya, Shula's heart, which had been heavy for the past year, gradually opened a door. He naturally thought of everything that had happened in the Donglin district, and realized that he had never forgotten. That was his past. No matter whose identity the chip behind his neck was impersonating, he was still Shula. A smile appeared on his ordinary face, and he quietly looked at the purple-haired girl who was singing the last song. "I have to live well in the future," he said. Tai Ji-yuan frowned slightly and looked at him. "I never realized that someone as honest as you actually had the potential to be a philosopher." You only saw your idol, but you actually managed to connect it with how to live. That's because people like you don't know how difficult it is to live. Shula smiled. His pair of thick eyebrows, which were raised like throwing knives, began to emit a youthful vigor. The cheers in the stadium were cut off by the wide floor-to-ceiling glass, reducing the frenzied atmosphere by quite a bit. Jian Shueya, who had already returned backstage, had no intention of returning. Under the soothing accompaniment of the closing song and the soft lighting, the citizens of Linhai City began to reluctantly leave the stadium. Shula looked at the venue that retreated like a tide under the window. He was calm and silent. Although he didn't really see Jian Shueya and didn't have close contact with her, he was already very satisfied. He subconsciously took a deep breath, as if he wanted to firmly engrave the memories of today in his mind, so that he could tell Uncle and Li Wei in his dreams. A faint fragrance wafted into his nostrils. It was the thousand-star flower tree, which was as tall as a person, gently accompanying the youth. The soil in the flower tree was covered with a layer of small white stones. Right at this moment, the door to the luxurious private room opened. Ying Jiyuan placed the wine glass in his hand by the window and was about to put on his coat and leave when a trace of doubt suddenly appeared between his brows. This was because he noticed that butler Jin, who had pushed open the door and entered, had an ugly expression on his face. This loyal subordinate who had followed his family for many years had always been calm and collected, and he rarely displayed such emotions. What happened? The staff of the Federation Investigation Bureau's Linhai Field office stationed at the Radio Management Committee found an abnormal current wave near the stadium. Butler Jin looked at Tai Jiyuan and said softly. Shula had already turned around, but he didn't understand what had happened. The Radio Management Committee was responsible for monitoring the television broadcast. What did the abnormal current wave have to do with people like him? Butler Jin quickly continued, it should be some kind of heat current emitted by some large equipment, but it was hidden in the signal band of the satellite, so it wasn't easy to find. At that moment, the door of the luxury box was pushed open again, and the group of black-clad agents from the Special Task Force entered in a line with vigilant expressions. The leader of the agents said in a deep voice, the Special Task Force has received news that there are some problems in Linhai today. After saying this, the leader of the agents, who was about 40 years old, tilted his head and listened carefully to the voice in his earpiece. He then looked up and said directly, "We must evacuate immediately." A tense atmosphere suddenly filled the entire luxury box. The agents of the Special Task Force began to contact their colleagues outside the stadium and began to file a report. Their hands were already on the holsters at their waists. The two agents at the door poked their heads out and looked around vigilantly. Shula was shocked. He didn't expect to be involved in such an incident right after watching Jian Shueya's concert. Then, his eyebrows twitched slightly because he noticed a strange phenomenon in the room. His right hand, which was hanging by his side, slowly lowered and touched the edge of the flower tree. Hearing the leader of the agents, Tai Jiyuan didn't move. He put his jacket on his left arm and looked at Butler Jin quietly. Last night, Butler Jin had already warned him that some forces were starting to become restless. However, he thought that in the Federation Society, which was ruled by law, those families wouldn't have the guts to carry out an assassination in broad daylight. Moreover, he had always had good security around him, and not many people knew that he was going to watch the concert today. Therefore, he followed the schedule and came. It's possible, that hot start noise that we heard, could be from a military mecha. Butler Jin glanced at Tai Jiyuan worriedly. This judgment immediately increased the tension in the luxury box. Federation mecha were strictly controlled by the military. If someone wanted to harm Tai Jiyuan and actually used a military mecha, it could only mean that the other party's power was unfathomable. More importantly, this was an extremely rare violent method in the strange political history of the Federation, which meant that the other party was crazy. Shula stood silently behind Tai Jiyuan. After hearing this news, a heavy weight weighed down on his heart. He looked at Tai Jiyuan quietly, not knowing what this friend of his had done to make some people want to assassinate him at all costs. Fortunately, the Tai family's security measures were airtight, and with the cooperation of the Federation government, they were able to monitor the situation in advance. The capital had also given a clear warning. At this time, the people in the box reacted in advance and should be able to leave in time. The two agents at the door of the box held guns in both hands and walked out of the heavy door calmly with their bodies slightly lowered. They began to confirm the safety of the corridor. In the box, a few Special Task Force agents in black suits had already taken out their standard handguns from their holsters and started to push the safety pins with the thumbs of their right hands. At this moment, more than a dozen extremely shrill sounds of something breaking through the air rang out. More than a dozen hard white stones all smashed into the face of one of the agents. With a loud bang, the agent's face was covered in blood. Blood splattered everywhere. With a muffled grunt, the agent opened fire with the handgun in his hand. He opened fire at Tai Ji-yuan, bang, 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 bang. A series of rapid and crisp gunshots rang out in the luxurious box. The gunshots of the agents, which had been processed, were crisp but not loud. It was more like the sound of soybeans being fried. After the crackling sounds stopped, the box returned to silence. Only the low sound of gunshots still produced a faint echo in the room. The faint smell of gunfire filled the air. The agent's body lay on the floor in a pool of blood. He had been shot at least 4 times. His face was badly mangled by the stones, and one of his eyeballs had burst open. The 40-year-old Special Task Force leader lowered the muzzle of his gun and looked around the room. He confirmed that the last shot that the agent had fired had only grazed Tai Ji-yuan's body and shot into the wall. Only one of his team members had been hit in the thigh by a stray bullet. It was not fatal. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. The Special Task Force agents reacted quickly when they were suddenly attacked by a mole. They killed that person in the shortest amount of time. However, the Special Task Force leader stared blankly at the body in the pool of blood. He could not believe his eyes. He asked softly, "Bulma, this? Why?" The Special Task Force agents were all vetted countless times to confirm their absolute loyalty to the Federation and the law. Only then were they qualified to be personal bodyguards. Why this agent named Bulma shot at Tai Ji-yuan and when he was bribed to become an assassin had become a mystery. Even if he was still alive, there was no way he could answer these questions. Under the glory of the First Charter, he had assassinated the heir of the Tai family. His fate had long been sealed. Therefore, the Special Task Force leader could not understand how his team member had become a criminal. "We need to evacuate immediately." The Special Task Force leader reported the incident in the private room to his team members through the intercom. At the same time, he changed the evacuation plan. He looked at Tai Ji-yuan and said in a heavy tone, "There is a mole, and the evacuation route is no longer a secret." The Special Task Force leader reported the news of Bulma's betrayal to the Special Task Force officers as quickly as possible. Then, he raised his head and looked deeply at the young man by the window. He should have been grateful to the young man for not letting Tai Ji-yuan die and not letting his team of agents become criminals of the Federation. However, his feelings were very complicated and strange. This was because the young man had discovered Bulma's problem earlier than him and the other professionals. Furthermore, he had only used a handful of stones to interfere with Bulma's shooting. Beside the floor-to-ceiling window, Shula's chest kept rising and falling. He was still in a state of nervousness and fear. There were a few white stones scattered around his feet. He thought that if his reaction had been slightly slower, Tai Ji-yuan would have been a dead man by now. From the moment the special agent named Bulma entered the private room, Shula had noticed his abnormality. This was because this was the special agent who had checked on him outside the private room at the beginning. This special agent actually did not find the stun baton he had hidden in his boots. It was either the special agent's professionalism was extremely poor, or he had something very important on his mind at the time and missed this part of it. Special Task Force agents were responsible for protecting the president and some important political figures. How could they have such poor professionalism? However, what really made Shula wary was this agent's reaction after he had entered the private room. When Butler Jin had mentioned that a military mecha might have already been activated in the vicinity of the gymnasium, this agent had remained as calm as the other agents. However, he appeared to be too calm, so calm that not a trace of doubt or shock could be seen in his eyes. Uncle Feng Yu had once exclaimed that Shula had the gift of being able to read people's minds. Throughout his years as a mechanic, he had developed a pair of keen and observational eyes. In the shortest amount of time, he could notice even the slightest changes around him. Therefore, when he saw the special agents take out their pistols and start to push the safety pins, his eyes began to narrow nervously. When he noticed the special agent named Bulma push the safety pin with his thumb, the muzzle of the gun started to move in an extremely inconspicuous manner. When he secretly aimed it at Tai Jiyuan, he moved. Even if it was a misunderstanding, he had to move. His right hand, which was hanging by the side of the flower pot, grabbed a handful of small white stones. The burning sensation in his body and behind his waist surged and turned into a powerful trembling force. It traveled from his skin to his palm, and he threw it out with all his might. The white stones were mixed with the mysterious power in his body. At that moment, they became as sharp as bullets. Thus, there was an additional corpse on the floor of the private room. Its eyes were split open, and its face was mangled. Chapter 117. Did you see that? My life isn't easy, either. Tai Jiyuan didn't look at the corpse on the ground. A person who couldn't speak wasn't worth paying attention to. He smiled as he spoke to Shu Le. This sentence was obviously directed at Shu Le, who said that people like him didn't know how hard it was to live. Shu Le tilted his head and didn't say anything. In fact, he hadn't completely recovered from the shock of what happened earlier. Although he was the first to notice the abnormality of the agent, the gunfight in front of him made the originally spacious luxurious private room seem extremely small. The gunshots ended too quickly, so quickly that he didn't even have time to be afraid of stray bullets. Tai Jiyuan didn't say anything like thank you for saving his life again. He couldn't use his own life to repay the favor of saving his life, so it was fine as long as they both kept it in mind. We should go. The middle-aged leader of the agent saw that the young master of the Tai family was still chatting with Shu Le as if nothing had happened. He couldn't help but frown and urge them again. At this time, Butler Jin, who had been on the phone all this time, walked over and said calmly, I've already spoken to the director of the special task force. You guys stay in this room for the time being and don't go out. The leader of the agent was slightly stunned, but he immediately understood the meaning of the old butler's words. There was a traitor in his team, and the Tai family no longer trusted them. At least under the current circumstances, they had no choice but to choose not to trust them. He was silent for a moment and decided that this was the only thing he could do at the moment, so he nodded. Butler Jin looked at Tai Jiyuan's side profile and said, the personnel of the security team have entered this area of the stadium and are currently exchanging fire. They should be able to clear this area in 3 minutes. Since that phone call, Tai Jiyuan's security had been transferred from the special task force to the Tai family's own security team. Since the enemy could even infiltrate the special task force and possibly use mechas, then the road leading out of the stadium would definitely be filled with assassins responsible for sniping. At this moment, the members of the Tai family security team had already started exchanging fire with these people. Since Butler Jin had given them 3 minutes, he must have been very confident in his subordinates. Tai Jiyuan listened quietly and then suddenly said, Can you find the location of the military mecha in 3 minutes? No. Butler Jin watched from the corner of his eye as the special task force agents began to make their way to the room beside the private room. He replied softly, It's precisely because we can't that we need to leave as soon as possible. After a moment of silence, Tai Jiyuan shook his head. Looking through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the stadium below, he said softly, There are over 30,000 spectators. Even if they were to evacuate urgently, it would still take more than 10 minutes. I'll be out in 3 minutes. If that military mecha had chosen to attack at that time, how many people would have died? I don't want innocent citizens to be my meat shield. When Shu Le heard this, a sincere and appreciative smile appeared on his face. Tai Jiyuan looked at him and smiled. He calmly sat back down on the sofa and said to Butler Jin calmly, The enemy must have taken your reaction time into consideration. If we were to leave now, they might be waiting for this moment. If that's the case, why don't we wait? After all, they should be more anxious than us. Butler Jin was silent for a long time. Then, he turned around and left. The phone in his hand was connected again. He continuously issued orders in a low voice, asking for support from the family. At this moment, his phone call represented the will of the Thai family. Every order would be carried out effectively. Every message delivered would cause an unquenchable shock within the Federation. You surprised me. Shula sat on the other side of the sofa. He held a glass of wine and took big gulps to suppress the anxiety and nervousness in his heart. Other than when his uncle was being hunted down by the Federal Army, he had never experienced such a big scene in his life. You don't have to praise me. I know that I'm in a privileged class with a strong sense of morality. Tai Ji-yuan took a sip of wine and said with a self-deprecating smile, actually, you surprised me more. Not to mention your reaction earlier, at least you still have the guts to stay here and drink with me. That's really something. I don't know if I'll be turned into a hornet's nest once I leave the room. Since that's the case, I might as well stay here with you. I think it's safer here. Shula smiled bitterly and said honestly, actually, I'm very nervous. At this time, the members of the Thai family's security team had completely taken over the work of the agents. The top floor of the stadium had been confirmed to be safe. However, there were still occasional sounds of gunfire coming from outside the VIP room. The people who were slowly leaving the stadium definitely didn't notice these sounds. However, the two young men in the VIP room knew very well that these sounds were the sounds of special guns firing non-stop. 2 minutes had already passed. The Thai family's security team was gradually clearing out the path of retreat. However, no one felt relaxed. According to the reports of those team members, the people on the other side seemed to be a group of well-trained professional soldiers. Then they thought about the military mecha that had been running hot for more than 10 minutes and still hadn't found its exact location. Everyone was very nervous. Shula was also the same. Thinking about that night in the H1 area, when the person in front of him who was younger than him fainted and helpless in his arms, his heart surged with the urge to protect the other person. Don't worry, you'll be fine today, Shula said very seriously. The passage is clear, there is no crowd, we can pass through. In the communication device, someone used a fast and steady voice to report. Wearing bulletproof vests and helmets, Tai Ji-yuan and Shula walked out of the VIP room under the protection of more than 10 fully armed security personnel and walked out of the gymnasium. There were 2 corpses lying in the elevator reserved for VIPs. The doors of the elevator opened and closed repeatedly, repeating the same process for eternity. There was a series of hurried footsteps on the empty stairs. Shula, who was following behind Tai Ji-yuan, saw the bullet marks on the wall and the blood around the corner through the glass mask. He listened to his own hurried breathing and quickly followed the group down the stairs. He wondered in his heart how many of the Thai family's security personnel had died here today. The gymnasium had already been cleared by the security personnel to ensure that it was safe. The service personnel who were lucky enough to survive the gunfight were gathered in a room. When the group of people walked past the room, Shula could not help but take a look inside. He saw the frightened expressions on the faces of the girls, and he felt slightly perplexed. The stairs led directly to the underground parking lot. The group of people opened the door and saw a black car without any logo. The back door of the black car was already open, and Butler Jin was sitting in the driver's seat. Chapter 118. Seeing this black car without any logo, security personnel wearing dark combat suits rushed out in the shortest time possible and spread out around the car. Although these bodyguards, who were obviously from the military, still maintained vigilance on their faces, the anxiety in their eyes lessened a lot. Shula noticed that Tai Ji-yuan in front of him, the muscles on his back that had been tight all this time also relaxed at this moment. The danger was not over. The people present were either well-trained professionals or people like Tai Ji-yuan, who had a calmness that was not in line with his age. The only reason for their sudden relaxation was that black car. Shula judged that his companions seemed to have infinite confidence in this black car. However, Even if this black car was specially made and could be bulletproof, could it withstand the attack of a military mecha? A trace of confusion flashed through Shula's mind. At the same time, his eyes passed over the black car's ceiling that reflected the parking lot lights and fell on the concrete wall directly facing the door. In the luxury box, he was able to discover the mole earlier than the special task force agents because he was an outsider. Secondly, he had extremely keen eyesight and hearing. Thirdly, it was because of his experience in the past year. Since escaping from Donglin, he had been carefully observing and guarding everything around him. He was always worried that one day the police or special forces of the Federation would come to deal with him. Therefore, when he did not feel absolutely safe, he would look at everyone with a suspicious gaze. And all the unusual places. Gradually, this seemed to have become an instinct of his. His eyes fell on the concrete wall and found that it was a little wet. At the same time, he faintly heard a sizzling sound, and his heart trembled. This observation and thinking did not take long. At this moment, Tai Jiyuan was under the protection of a bodyguard, using the fastest speed to get into the back of the black car. Shula's pupils suddenly shrank, and he used his strength at will. The burning heat broke out again behind his waist, causing him to stomp his feet on the concrete floor. Like a fierce tiger, he pushed Tai Jiyuan to the ground and shouted, "Be careful." His reaction was still a moment too slow. A black metal tip suddenly grew out of the slightly wet cement wall opposite the door. It hummed and rotated, and in a very short time, it pierced through the entire cement wall. It was very easy, like a knife piercing through a thin piece of paper. The cement wall couldn't withstand the force of the metal drill and instantly fell apart, scattering into countless pieces of cement and flying in all directions of the underground parking lot. A black mech about 5 meters tall slowly walked out from behind the broken cement wall. This scene was extremely shocking. It looked like a god of death had come out from the netherworld. The mech with a metallic luster was faintly discernible in the dust, as if it was going to reap the lives of everyone in the field. The black mecha's left mechanical arm was still spinning at high speed, while the right mechanical arm's Darling's standard rotary gun began to spray bullets at the black cars and the surrounding Tai family security personnel. Darling's rotary gun spewed out 6 brilliant blue flames, and countless metal bullets began to dance in the air. Shula only had enough time to push Tai Jiyuan to the ground. He only had enough time to shout that one word before the black mecha's firepower reverberated throughout the entire underground space. The bodyguard who had been following Tai Jiyuan all this time was instantly pierced through by those high-speed bullets. He was reduced to a pile of flesh and blood that enveloped the side of the black car. The black mecha's gunshots were very strange and dull, as if countless balloons were exploding. Puff, 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 puff. It wasn't that terrifying, but the bullets dancing in the air in the underground parking lot were abnormally terrifying. The military mecha's frightening speed of firing made the bullets cover the entire area like raindrops. Loud whistling sounds, the sound of bullets piercing through the air, the sound was terrifying. The black mecha's right mechanical arm spat out endless gunfire, cutting through the air and making ear-piercing screeching sounds. The bullets carried enormous kinetic energy and lethality, and in an instant, the cement walls of the parking lot were smashed into pieces. Countless sharp cement shards fell off and flew in an irregular pattern, shooting in all directions. The Federation's technology combined with the military's killing machine, at this moment, fully displayed its infinite power. No matter how well trained a soldier was, in front of this black mecha that walked out from the dust, they would only feel their own insignificance and endless despair. As for the elite security personnel of the Tai family, they didn't even have the time to feel despair. Within the first second after the black mecha broke through the cement walls, they were all shot into countless pieces by the black mecha's gunfire. The Tai family's security personnel had already carried out full control of the underground parking lot. They also knew that in the surrounding areas of the gymnasium, there might be a mecha that had already completed its warm-up activation. However, no one would have thought that this standard military mecha had actually been hiding under the gymnasium all this time, just waiting behind that slightly wet cement wall. That cement wall was obviously newly built. It was even possible that after the other party found out about Tai Jiyuan's whereabouts, they built it overnight last night. If the Tai family had more time to react, more time to prepare, they might not have made such a mistake. If the Federation's Rapid Response Department had more time, perhaps they would have already found out where the mecha was hiding. However, there were no IFS in this world. A mecha that had wandered out of the control of the military was in itself an inconceivable matter. Who would be able to fully understand the layers and layers of inside information behind this? And the faction that planned today's operation against Tai Jiyuan was actually able to come up with such a meticulous plan in such a short amount of time. They even had the ability to secretly transport a 5-meter-tall mecha to Lin Hai and into the underground parking lot of the gymnasium right before Jian Shui's concert. All these signs indicated that the person who planned and executed this assassination plan was not only as crazy as Tai Jiyuan had described, but also had a kind of genius or idiotic imagination. The appearance of this standard black military mecha had undoubtedly hit the weak spot of all the countermeasures of the Tai family. The most crucial part was the timing and location of its appearance. In just 1 second, that black mecha had eliminated all the enemies. Its strength was really enough to make people despair. Only those who were still alive could feel despair, such as Xu Le, who was lying in a pool of blood from the security personnel. However, Tai Jiyuan did not seem to be in despair. Cold sweat had begun to form on his pale face, but his eyes were still fixed on the door of the black car not far in front of him. It was as if he was certain that as long as he could enter that black car, even if the opponent was a military mecha, he would still be able to survive. In the first second of the mecha's attacks, this black car had indeed displayed an inconceivable ability to withstand attacks. It was unknown what special material the body and tires of this car were made of, but under the frenzied barrage of the black mech Darren's revolver, countless deep metallic glints appeared on the body of the car. Some of the edges of the car had already been pierced through, ripping open powerlessly. However, the body of the black car did not suffer any irreversible damage. Although those extremely tragic-looking large bullet holes glowed with a pitiful metallic glow, not a single bullet hole was able to pierce through the interior of the car. In what should have been a quiet underground car park, the sound of electric current crackling and the strange sound of alloy tracks grinding against the concrete floor rang out. The atmosphere was particularly gloomy and somber. Amidst the noise, amidst the dust, amidst the bloody fog in the air, that black mecha approached the black car. On its right mechanical arm, Darren's rotating gun barrel was still wildly firing bullets, not stopping for even a moment. The black car was continuously hit by the bullets, miserably bouncing off the ground and then falling heavily once again. The tires slid on the concrete floor. The black mecha's gunfire was like an invisible hand, pushing it in the direction of the main entrance. In front of the enormous firepower, the black car without any insignia was like a small boat in a storm. At any time, it could be overturned by those dazzling waves of gunfire, and then be torn into countless pieces, sinking to the bottom of the sea, never to rise again. And in the only angle that the black car could cover, Xu Le and Tai Jiyuan, who were in the pool of blood, could not even lift their heads under the flying metal shards and concrete. They were even more unable to retreat into the interior of the stadium, and could only wait for the metal shells to tear them into pieces. M52, it's an M52, Xu Le lay in the pool of blood, mumbling incessantly. Looking through the bottom of the black car, he saw that the mecha tracks had already entered advance mode. He anxiously and angrily discovered the model of this powerful mecha. Boundless fear made Xu Le's face abnormally pale, but it also made his mind abnormally clear at this moment. The secretion of adrenaline allowed this young man to finally show that his nerves were stronger than anyone else's in this desperate situation. In this moment, he was a rock of Donglin. Under the attacks of the black mecha, a rock would also shatter like tofu, but until the moment it truly shattered, the rock would always be able to maintain a terrifying calmness, just like Xu Le at this moment. He narrowed his eyes, his entire body cold as he recalled all the blueprints of the M-type mecha in his mind. He recalled the firing speed of Garland's rotating gun barrel, recalled the loading capacity of the M52's chain magazine, and calculated the time. 4 seconds after the appearance of the black mecha, Xu Le and Tai Jiyuan were the only 2 living people left in the underground car park. Xu Le and Tai Jiyuan. Under the impact of this level of power, Shula knew very well whether or not Butler Jin in the black car had been jolted to death. He only knew that he only had time to calculate for 2 seconds. It was at this moment that his ears, which were already buzzing from the vibrations, caught a sound. That extremely soft sound was like the friction between a piece of paper and another piece of paper. The scientists of the Federation had never been able to solve the problem caused by the inherent structure of the M-series mecha, the 0.2-second pause when the chain magazine reloaded. Although Shula was a genius in mechanical engineering, he did not have the ability to solve this problem. However, he knew this problem, knew that he only had 0.2 seconds, and he had been preparing for this 0.2 second. Chapter 119. A pause of 0.2 seconds. If a human was not able to focus, they would not be able to notice it at all. Even if they did notice this pause, they would not be able to react, unless this person's reflexes and the ability of the body to achieve this speed were different from the rest. Coincidentally, Shula was such a person who was different from the rest. In that instant, the muscle fibers in his body twisted and stretched, exploding with terrifying strength. This strength was converted into speed, and like a grey shadow, he shot up slightly from the ground, grabbed Tai Ji-yuan by the back of his neck, and threw him into the car. The unique muffled sound of Darren's gun barrel rang out once more, and the dense stream of bullets slammed heavily into the already tattered body of the black car, sending it flying off the ground once more. Shula's good luck came to an end at this moment. Tai Ji-yuan had already been thrown into the backseat of the car, but because the car had suddenly shot up, his body slammed heavily into the bottom of the heavy back door of the car, unable to enter. With a muffled thud, Shula painfully collided with metal and fell to the ground. At the same time his body hit the ground, the 4 wheels of the black car that had been sent flying by the mecha's firepower also landed heavily on the ground at almost the same time. In the instant before the black car landed on the ground, its tires had already begun to spin rapidly while still in the air. Butler Jin, who had been sitting in the front row without knowing whether he was alive or dead, reacted at some point. In that split second, he made preparations to escape. Screech, screech. The tires rubbed against the ground, producing a sharp sound. Smoke rose, and there were even sparks. With a screech, the moment the black car landed, it gripped the ground in a decisive manner and shot forward. In just an instant, it had become a plume of dust that rushed towards the underground parking lot. Its speed was truly astounding. Several streaks of blood had just appeared on Shula's face, but before they could flow down, he stared dumbfoundedly as the black car carrying Tai Ji-yuan sped away, leaving him in the parking lot filled with flesh and blood and the smell of gunfire. And at this time, without the black car as a cover, he stood next to the enormous and powerful black military M52 mecha, looking very lonely and small. After Shula threw Tai Ji-yuan into the car, he realized that when he was still outside the car, he didn't yell at Butler Jin, "Start the car," like those righteous protagonists in movies. "Don't mind me," because he didn't have time to shout, and he didn't want to be left behind. Although he knew full well that the black car had to seize the opportunity to escape, he was certain that this was not Tai Ji-yuan's intention. Instead, it was the most logical choice that Butler Jin had made. If he had been able to react in time, perhaps he would have subconsciously asked Tai Ji-yuan to escape first and not bother about him. However, he still felt extremely frustrated. Everyone had either died or escaped, leaving him alone to face that black M52 mech. Shula half-crouched on the blood-soaked concrete floor. His pupils constricted nervously as he stared at the black mech that was turning around not too far away from him. That black metallic military mecha didn't pay any attention to the unarmed young man beside it. Its target was the black car that was currently speeding away from the underground parking lot, because it knew very well that the heir of the Tai family was in that car. And in its opinion, no matter how well trained a human was, he would not be able to pose any threat to its powerful mecha, not to mention that the human did not have any heavy weapons in his hands. And so, the black M52 mecha turned around silently. Amidst a series of static noises, the lower half of the mecha began to enter full movement mode. Meanwhile, on the right mechanical arm of the mecha, A metal barrel-like component had already protruded, aiming at the black car that was already 50 meters away and was about to reach the underground parking lot. Schuler's entire body was in intense pain. He stared in disbelief at the movements of the black mecha in front of him. In an instant, he recognized the component protruding from the mecha's right mechanical arm. It was the main cannon. Tai Ji-yuan awkwardly squeezed into the car, but was immediately jolted up by the violent vibrations. Then, he saw that Butler Jin, who had been in the driver's seat, had raised his head at some point. He was looking ahead silently, and the battle scene around the car window was instantly cast behind him. His face was pale, and he immediately noticed that Schuler was not in the car. He abruptly turned his head, and through the cracked rear window that was still intact, he looked back. Then, his expression became abnormally complex, because he saw a scene that he could not accept. Far away in the underground parking lot, that huge black mecha was turning around amidst the sound of static. Meanwhile, his friend Schuler was half kneeling in a pool of blood beside the mecha's mechanical leg. He looked like an ant that could be trampled to death at any moment. Meanwhile, behind the completely collapsed concrete wall, several fully armed killers were forcing their way through the area the mecha had opened up. A pained expression appeared on Shi Jiyuan's handsome face, and his usually calm eyes were filled with boundless anger and grief. He knew that no matter whether it was a random move from that military mecha or those mecha squad soldiers hiding behind the concrete wall, they could easily kill Schuler. His thin lips were tightly pressed together. His hands gripped the backseat of the car so hard that his fingertips dug deep into it, but he did not say a word. Schuler had saved his life once again, but he could only watch as his benefactor died. This was because he knew that even if he stopped the car and drove back now, he would not be able to save the other's life. Moreover, at this critical juncture, Butler Jin would definitely not listen to his orders. Tai Ji-yuan's emotions were very complicated. Mecha's main cannon firing. Defense probability, 40%. The car's central control computer began to beep urgently and began to issue a stern warning. The seat belts automatically popped out and strapped the bodies of the people in the car tightly to their seats. Like Schuler, Tai Ji-yuan narrowed his eyes slightly. Through the spiderweb-like glass, he looked at the black mecha's raised right mechanical arm in the distance. He looked at the incomparably tiny Schuler beside the black mecha, as though he had not heard the warning at all. Schuler half knelt in the pool of blood. He looked at the huge mecha not far in front of him and slowly but terrifyingly used its right mechanical arm to aim at the fleeing black car in the distance. Since he was young, he had been constantly learning about mecha mechanics. After a year of absorbing information at Ua University, he could easily determine that this M52's main cannon, which had the highest output power, would hit the fleeing black car in 0.3 seconds. The black car had already demonstrated its powerful defensive capabilities in the previous attack. However, Schuler did not think that the black car would be able to survive the attack of this mecha's main cannon. Even if it was the Empire's armored mecha, under the close-range attack of an M52's main cannon, it would only end up with a hole in the middle. The black M52 mecha let out a sizzling sound. The powerful firepower prepared for the attack caused this huge and heavy mecha's body to begin to tremble slightly. Kneeling beside the mecha, Schuler's face was pale, and his body began to tremble violently. His eyes stared coldly at the M52 mecha in front of him, at the alloy hydraulic pipe that was exposed to him in attack mode. Although that black car had left him almost heartlessly, other than anger, Schuler did not have time to develop too many negative emotions. Just as he had always emphasized to Shi Qinghai, he was a person who only knew how to use his hands and not his mouth. He was a very direct person. The reason Schuler had fallen into such a hopeless situation was because he wanted to save Tai Ji-yuan. At this time, the black mecha was about to kill Tai Ji-yuan. If he were to say that he had died because of Tai Ji-yuan, and Tai Ji-yuan had still died in the end, this would be an extremely unreconciled and infuriating matter. It was a bit of a mouthful, but in Schuler's mind, it was only a fleeting thought. Unreconciled, not worth it. A wave of stubborn viciousness quickly took over his entire body. The corpses lying in the pool of blood around him, as well as the innocent victims he had seen in the gymnasium earlier, stimulated his long-hidden bloodthirst. How could he stop the black mecha's main cannon from firing? Schüler had no choice. Although he was not an ordinary person, he was not a god either. He could only stare fixedly at the hydraulic pipe behind the mecha's right mechanical leg. Then, a familiar image appeared before his eyes. It was a verdant valley, and behind a big tree was a black M52 mech. That uncle with a familiar face smashed into the tree like a cannonball, breaking the hydraulic pipe with a single punch. Oil shot out like a waterfall, and the M52, which had lost its balance, immediately toppled over. Schüler had only seen the blueprints of the mecha before the M37 series, so he did not know which aspects of the current military's most advanced M52 mecha had flaws. However, Uncle Foam Yu's ferocious figure in battle with the mecha had already given him the most profound lesson. The military mecha that was locked onto the black car's trajectory coldly ignored the ant-like Schüler. How could it have known that the ant had already reached out with its little pincers, trying to take a bite out of the elephant's leg? The posture of this black M52 mech before Schüler's eyes was too cool. It just so happened that the hydraulic pipe was exposed right in front of Schüler's eyes. The position and angle of the hydraulic pipe closest to Schüler were all perfect. It was like a slut sticking up her butt and telling others to come and kick her. Come and kick her. Schüler, who had already been blinded by viciousness and bloodthirst, was moved at this moment. His heart was itching, and there was not a part of his body that was not itching. So, his whole body trembled, his face pale, his eyes extremely bright. Like a madman, he charged out, aiming at the hydraulic pipe on the black mecha's right mechanical leg, and viciously kicked it. Chapter 120. He was an orphan who lost both his parents and his younger sister. He was a sincere and kind young man who liked to help his neighbors and help old ladies cross the road. He was a genius in mechanical engineering. He was an auditing student who had set many records in UA University. He was a small character who was sincere to others and honest to himself. He was a capable, virtuous, and responsible youth. However, he was also a youth who grew up in the darkness of the mines and underground tunnels. He was a fugitive from the Federation who possessed a mysterious power within his body. Sometimes, even he himself forgot that many years ago, he was already a silent youth who dared to kill. On that deep and weeping night, the 10-year-old Schüler used the tip of an abandoned mechanical suit's elbow hydraulic pipe he found in the junkyard to kill a Hushi prefecture mafia boss. In the underground parking lot filled with the stench of blood and an oppressive atmosphere, the not yet 20-year-old Schüler leapt up from the ground like a leopard. Like a streak of black smoke, he rushed to the bottom of the military mecha. Without thinking, his entire body trembled as he viciously kicked that conspicuous hydraulic pipe that deserved to be kicked. In his life, perhaps he really did have a lot of affinity with this type of hydraulic pipe. Every time, he would be able to witness his most fearful, most ruthless moments, no matter how the Federation's scientists used their imaginations. For such a large mechanical body like a mecha, the most critical linkage of the control system and structural system was still the same as it had been countless years ago, all of them the most primitive type of hydraulic system. There had been scientists who had proposed other designs before, but the cold and merciless battlefield experience had long since proven that only the most primitive type was the most reliable and sturdy. The mechanical legs of the M52 mecha had at least 7 hydraulic pipes of different thicknesses and different uses. Most of them were hidden under the armor, some deep within the alloy structure, while the exposed hydraulic pipe was all formed from alloy in one go. It was thicker than a human's thigh, strong enough to withstand concentrated fire, so the designers had never thought of installing any anti-strike device on this hydraulic pipe. This was because a monster like the mechanic Foam Yu should not exist in this world. Schüler's body trembled violently. The enormous power in his body instantly passed through the countless pathways in his body, and all of it was delivered to his thighs, his joints, and his feet. The foot that carried with it a fierce whistling sound ruthlessly kicked the cold and sturdy alloy hydraulic pipe, making a loud muffled sound. The moment the pair of leather boots came into contact with the hydraulic pipe, they began to deform and tear apart. In a very short period of time, they bloomed into countless pieces, fluttering and struggling around Schüler's feet like butterflies, but they did not have time to fly away. The power that came from behind his waist passed from the soles of his feet to the hydraulic pipe. The metallic luster of the hydraulic pipe dimmed a little, and then it trembled slightly, and then it returned to normal. The cold metal didn't have the slightest ripple. The hydraulic pipe did not break, and it did not collapse like the mecha that had been hit by Fengyu in the outskirts of Hushi province a year ago, bathed in oil like a waterfall and collapsed. That black mecha did not move at all. It coldly aimed at the black car that was about to escape from the underground parking lot and fired its main cannon. In that instant, Shula felt as if his foot had kicked a metal plate. No, he had kicked an iron pillar that had taken root in the ground. A wave of pain that was enough to make a person faint traveled from the soles of his feet to his ankles, then to his knees, and finally to the base of his thighs. He could even feel countless cracks beginning to extend from his toes. Countless muscle fibers began to tear, and even his leg bones began to crack. An unarmed and defenseless human using his own flesh and blood to launch an attack against a massive metal mecha, this was a crazy move. Furthermore, the incomparably large recoil from that mecha's metal body further proved that this kind of challenge was too tragic to be effective. Shula was sent flying by the recoil. The power he had been using to control his body had long been reduced to nothingness by the mecha's recoil. His body flew through the air like a kite with a broken string. Before the immense pain could fully occupy his mind, his leg bones were already completely shattered, hanging limply in the air. He felt as if all his bones had been shattered, and a sweet feeling began to accumulate in his chest and abdomen. Shula, who had been sent flying, danced in the air, his eyes watching the black mecha in front of him from the corner of his eye. He knew that he was not Uncle Fengyu, and did not have the ability to subdue a mecha single-handedly. He himself also did not have such extravagant hopes, so he was not disappointed, much less despairing. Instead, an incomparable flame of elation burned in his eyes, because he knew, this kick had definitely been effective. It was just that where the effect was, no one knew. The hydraulic tube by the black mecha's mechanical leg only trembled slightly under his foot, then returned to normal. However, in a place that neither the naked eye nor the mecha's monitoring system could detect, within the absolutely sealed fluid flowing within the tube, between the inductive component circuits that the mecha's control system relied on, a tremor began to spread. It was just like the pain and bone fractures that were spreading through Shula's body at this moment. That tremor was very similar to Shula's earlier tremors. Shula ended his journey of being sent flying. His head tilted back, and he spat out a large mouthful of blood as he landed heavily on the ground. At the same time he landed, the black mecha had also finished firing its main cannon. There was a saying in the Federation, if you deviated 1 centimeter from the correct direction at the beginning of your journey, by the time you finished your journey, you would find yourself 1,000 kilometers away from your destination. Shula's foot kicked the hydraulic tube, transmitting all the tremors in his body to it, causing the sealed fluid within the hydraulic tube to distort slightly. This was an error that the mecha's program would never allow, but this error happened in that instant. A vibration of about 0.01 mm was transmitted into the body of the massive mecha along with the ripples of the fluid. It gradually spread, passing through those electrical components and circuits, passing through those electrical and data channels, spreading air and was gradually magnified. In that instant, the right half of the black M52 mecha's body began to tremble slightly to an extent that was not visible to the naked eye. By the time the vibration of 0.01 mm reached the right mechanical arm of the black mecha, it had already become an error of 1 mm. A loud boom rang out. The main cannon of the military mecha had already exceeded the concept of normal speed. A vortex suddenly appeared in the air within the underground car park, and right in the middle of the vortex was an incomparably empty space. An empty space. Right in the path of the main cannon's aim, 3 holes the size of basketballs appeared almost simultaneously on the 3 thick concrete walls of the underground car park. The 3 holes were cut neatly in a straight line, and on the other side of the holes was the black car that was currently speeding away. However, due to the error of less than a millimeter, this terrifying blast brushed past the roof of the black car and directly pierced through 2 more concrete walls, landing somewhere unknown. An instant later, a terrifying explosion rang out from a room in the gymnasium's basement, and the entire ground began to shake. directly piercing through 5 concrete walls and finally triggering such a violent explosion. The power of the military M52 mecha's main cannon was truly too shocking. It was hard to imagine if this blast had landed directly on the black car. Tai Ji-yuan and Butler Jin in the car would have died a horrible death. Shu Le, who had landed in a pool of blood on the concrete floor, was once again bounced up from the ground by this blast. There was not a single part of his body that did not ache. However, his eyes, reddened by the blood, watched as the black car in the distance finally left the underground car park. He could not help but break into a grin, revealing his white teeth amidst the smoke as he laughed out loud. At the same time, his right hand found a cold gun by the side of the half-broken corpse beside him. That huge black mecha clearly did not expect its main cannon attack to actually miss its target. Although the pilot in the mecha's cockpit had felt a trace of surprise when that human had kicked the mecha in a frenzy earlier, his strong nerve control, logical judgment, and the instinct of a soldier to obey orders allowed him to completely ignore the kick that the lunatic had launched with his frail body. He simply aimed at the car and fired the main cannon. At this time, the pilot in the M52 mecha finally noticed that the fellow in the green military trench coat lying under the mecha's feet seemed to be a little unusual. However, he did not have the time to find out what was so unusual about this fellow's body. Just as the black car disappeared from the underground car park, this mecha warrior used his communicator to issue orders to the soldiers accompanying him. At the same time, his hands moved like the wind as he entered 17 data commands on the touch-sensitive holographic screen. Amidst the loud roar of the motor, this huge mecha began to move abruptly. Like an ice skater relying on the caterpillar equipment on its alloy legs, it started to move rapidly in the cramped underground car park. In an instant, it increased its speed. The black metal mecha glided beautifully forward as it chased after the human towards the exit of the underground car park, leaving behind only the piercing sound of air vibrations. The black M52 mecha chased after the human so resolutely, so decisively, so coldly. It did not even spare a glance at Shu Le, who had piqued its interest immensely. Shu Le, who had used a human's body to successfully cause his main cannon to miss. Other than the special class ace pilots of the federal military, who else could make such swift reactions and control so beautifully? The huge and terrifying black mecha chased after the car Tai Ji-yuan was in. Accompanied by the sound of dust and air vibrations, it disappeared from the exit. At this moment, Shu Le was in a state of shock, but he could not worry about Tai Ji-yuan's survival at all. This was because right now, he could only worry about his own survival. In the quiet underground parking lot, the smell of burnt flesh and blood filled the air. The surrounding concrete walls that had been flattened by the mecha's firepower still continued to fall with pieces of concrete and steel. There were 5 shocking round bullet holes in the concrete wall that separated the parking lot. Smoke was rising from them. The lights in the car park had all been extinguished long ago. This was because the automatic fire extinguishing system in response to explosions and high temperatures kept spraying water as if it was raining. This scene was extremely similar to that rainy night when Shu Le had killed for the first time. Chapter 121. In the darkness, water splashed everywhere. The gun that Shu Le had picked up instantly spat out a flame, illuminating the mist in front of the gun muzzle. It created a beautiful refracted ray of light that was as beautiful as a rainbow. He raised his right arm high and waved it quickly. The flame and the beautiful ray of light in the surroundings quickly dispersed, as if a red fan had suddenly opened up. A few muffled sounds rang out. It was unknown how many bullets had hit the militants, and how many bullets had hit the hard concrete walls. In the darkness, only the vague silhouettes of 6 or 7 militants could be seen. One of the silhouettes let out a muffled groan, his neck snapped, and he fell to the ground. Shu Le had never been in the military before. He had only memorized countless battle regulations and battle formations for the Ministry of Defense's mecha operator exam. Actually, this knowledge was not very useful for his exam, but Uncle Feng Yu had asked him to learn, so he had obediently learned. He had never thought that it would be useful at this moment. The bullets that he had randomly scattered in his nervousness had actually successfully hit a target. This should be the first time he had fired a gun. The heavy feeling on his wrist and the slightly numb recoil made his body, which was lying in the puddle of water, feel a little uncomfortable. This standard repeating gun should have belonged to one of the Thai family's security guards. However, that security guard had already died in the ambush of that military mecha. His corpse had been torn into countless pieces. Luckily, the safety of this gun had been switched off, allowing Schuler to complete his shot in the first instant. Schuler's reaction was very fast. What was even more admirable was his unyielding, silent, and determined personality. After being sent flying to the ground by the mecha, his subconscious action was to search for a weapon on the ground. He wanted to continue fighting for his life, even if it was just a struggle. In the darkness, in order to not expose himself, Schuler's right arm was raised extremely high. Even so, that group of well-trained militants could still accurately determine his position. A rapid rain of bullets rang out, and the sharp sound of bullets breaking through the air rang out. Countless splashes of water and concrete were sent flying everywhere. He had only been bitten by a mosquito. Schuler leaned against the back door and breathed rapidly. His chest heaved up and down as he felt the pain in his right arm. He knew that he had been shot by the militants before he slipped through the door. However, in the darkness, he did not know where he was shot. He only knew that there was a bullet wound on his right arm. Blood was flowing out and the pain was destroying his nerves. He was only bitten by a mosquito. In the darkness, his face was pale, but no one could see it. His eyes were bright to a terrifying degree. He breathed heavily, not caring whether the militants could hear him or not. He kept repeating the words about mosquitoes, convincing himself not to care about his injuries, convincing himself that he could still survive in such a difficult time. What was more serious than the gunshot wound was the injury to his right leg. Earlier, in order to shake that large and heavy mecha, he had focused all the strength in his body on his leg and kicked out. Although he had successfully destroyed the attack of the mecha's main cannon, the recoil from that huge force had directly destroyed his right leg. Right now, his right leg was twisted in a horrible position. The broken bone inside was cutting into his red and swollen leg muscles. It was very painful, but the pain was numbing. Schuler couldn't feel it at all. The rainwater in the underground parking lot was still spraying out. The smell of blood was slightly lighter than before, but the burnt smell was getting stronger. It was unknown whether the room that had been hit by the mecha's main cannon was currently burning with a raging fire. Schuler lay on the ground, silently gripping that unfamiliar metal gun. On the other side of the door were several militants who had participated in the assassination. These militants clearly had a military background and were used to following mecha in group operations. However, they were also no strangers to individual combat. This silent and tense standoff didn't last long. At least, it didn't last as long as Schuler felt. The group of militants didn't have much time to waste with him. They needed to retreat before the Federation's powerful forces could react. However, under the light of the First Charter, even if they retreated, it would probably be difficult for them to leave the Federation. The sound of gunfire rang out again. Countless bullets struck that heavy door, sending sparks and fragments flying. If this door in the underground parking lot wasn't made of metal, it was likely that Schuler, who was behind the door, would already have been turned into a hornet's nest by now. Behind the door, Schuler shrunk his body as much as possible to avoid being hit by the stray bullets flying in all directions. He didn't dare to raise his head at all, and he didn't dare to move. However, that gun was consciously raised by him and aimed at a certain angle beside him. This was completely based on his intuition. The gunshots had just stopped when a fierce figure pounced in. Schuler's index finger flicked lightly, and a bullet sprayed out from the barrel of the gun in his hand, knocking down that figure directly. However, after he flicked his finger, he found that he was wrong. This wasn't one of the militants, but the corpse of a security personnel whose body had been sliced in half by the mecha's shrapnel. Schuler's pupils contracted. He knew that he had reached the moment between life and death. In his originally empty body, a new surge of strength had unknowingly surged up. With a muffled grunt, he used his only intact left leg to push against the back of the door, forcefully sliding 1/2 meter to the side on the ground. Just as he slid, a black gun barrel quietly poked out from behind the door and hit the spot where he was originally standing, setting off a series of sparks. After narrowly dodging the shot, Shula's slightly narrowed eyes emitted an extremely bright light. He suddenly lunged to the side and fired the gun in his hand again. The militant who rushed in with the submachine gun in both hands was immediately enveloped in a rain of bullets. The bullets hit the man's bulletproof vest and made a muffled sound. He directly slammed into the door, making a loud noise. Shula raised the muzzle slightly and directly shot the man's head into a watermelon that fell to the ground. In the dark environment, the half-open door was like the mouth of a legendary monster, as if it was going to swallow all life. The militants on the other side of the door should be thinking this, and Shula behind the door was even more thinking this. He struggled to half squat against the wall, not knowing how many bullets were left in the gun in his hand. He should have picked up the dead militant's submachine gun, but he just carefully moved over there, hiding his body behind the dead body. His right hand slowly lowered, touching the side of his boots. At this time, in the quiet and dark tunnel behind Shula, there was suddenly a series of footsteps. The footsteps were very light. If it was not a child, then it should be a very light woman. The footsteps should not be a person. In such a tense moment, there were still people in the stadium that did not evacuate. Shula's eyes were filled with deep worry. If those innocent people were to come here, then only death would await them. Fuck your mother, fuck your mother. Shula's face was expressionless as he cursed. No one knew what these curses meant to him, but his pair of always smiling, seemingly incomparably sincere eyes became brighter and brighter, more and more determined. Don't come over, he shouted to the owner of the footsteps behind the darkness. Following his voice, the gunshots outside the door once again sounded. The gunfire cut through the space in front of Shula, making him unable to do anything. He could only watch as the two militants rushed over and entered the door. Fuck your mother, Shula softly cursed, and then rushed toward the two figures. The two militants clearly did not expect him to be so fearless as to hide so close to the door. They also did not expect him to react so quickly. At this moment, Shula's movements were extremely fast. At the moment of life and death, he erupted with all the strength in his body. The trembling began to squeeze his already exhausted body, as if it wanted to squeeze out every drop of strength from his muscle fibers. He was like a grey shadow, pouncing forward. In an extremely short distance, he pulled the trigger and shot down the militant who was slightly further away. He instantly threw away the gun in his hand, and at the same time the gun left his hand, his body suddenly crashed into the other militant. Suddenly, his elbow struck the cartilage of the opponent's throat. Using the hard bone of his waist, he fiercely struck the vital point of the opponent's crotch. Extending his fingertips fiercely pierced the opponent's eye socket. From the time he started training in the mine to the time he became a janitor in Ua University, he did not slack off for a single day. The arduous training made the 10 postures that Uncle Feng Yu taught Shula become an instinct of his body. At this moment, his strength completely erupted, vividly displaying it. That comfortable and ruthless feeling made him forget that he was dragging a crippled leg and had been shot several times. Chapter 122. The stun baton that Shula had named Flying Dagger had been cleverly modified into a multi-purpose tool. The electric shock effect at the front was still intact, but the back of the handle was designed with a retractable dagger tip. Earlier, he had electrocuted one of the militants unconscious. With a swipe of his right elbow, he held the dagger tightly between his thumb and index finger and stabbed towards the throat of the last militant. Unexpectedly, at the last moment, the militant actually turned the submachine gun in his hand into a cold weapon and directly blocked his wrist. As a soldier who had undergone many years of cruel training, his body possessed great strength. Especially when he was holding a gun, while Shula was only holding a small dagger. When the two were compared, Shula felt a strong vibration coming from his wrist in an instant. It made Shula feel that something was wrong. At this time, he, who was heavily injured, had no strength to use. Those strange postures that he had trained hard for many years were like water without a source. Also, he was burdened by his injury and could not use any strength. In the faint light, Looking at the cold and bloodthirsty eyes of the person close by, Shula felt his whole body go cold. It was as if he was exposed to the wind and snow of Linhai province outside the stadium. At this critical moment, a strength of unknown origin once again emerged from behind his waist and quickly surged towards his upper body. It directly passed through a certain area behind his neck and transmitted to both of his arms. Shula did not have time to enjoy this dramatic change. With a muffled groan, he spat out a mouthful of blood. A burst of intense and bone-deep pain exploded at the back of his neck. The explosion caused his eyes to turn red and his pupils to constrict. His lips trembled incessantly. The skin exposed to the outside was painful as if it was about to split open. And his brain felt as if there were countless needles piercing endlessly. Shula, who had been silent all this time, was used to being silent. Even when he thought that he was going to die, he would only curse softly or in his heart. Under this unbearable and immense pain, he finally cried out. Following this mournful howl, he placed his left hand on his right wrist and pushed forward along the pain. With a puff in front of the heavy and incomparably sturdy mecha, Shula was just an ordinary person. No matter how strong his strength was, he could only make the mecha tremble slightly. Compared to ordinary people, he, who had been taught by Fengyu for many years, was actually more like a machine than those soldiers who were made of iron. He was not a cold-killing machine, but rather his body. The muscle fibers, nerve bundles, and even every cell in his body were constantly advancing in the direction of the first order of machines. In front of machines, no matter how strong a soldier was, how could they resist? The sharp tip of the dagger that protruded from the back of the handle easily pierced through like a thin piece of paper. In an instant, the militant's arm was shaken off, and the submachine gun was sent flying. Shula, in his state of incomparable pain, subconsciously stabbed for the last time, making that small dagger give birth to a feeling of crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Blood spurted out as the dagger easily and casually pierced the militant's throat. Shula's whole body went limp. His eyes turned slightly black as he collapsed to the ground. At this time, he could not find the slightest bit of strength in his body. That intense pain was still constantly emitting waves from the back of his neck. 10,000 needles, 100 million needles pierced and pulled out from his brain, making him completely forget about his crippled leg and those gunshot wounds. In the moment before he fell to the ground, from the corner of his eyes, he saw with incomparable pain that the militant that he had electrocuted earlier was currently trying to get up from the ground. It seemed that the combat suits worn by these soldiers also had a certain degree of resistance to electric current. Shula knew that he was about to faint and would not be able to wake up again. This was because other than fainting, there was no other way for his body to withstand the pain at the back of his neck. This was a natural instinctive reaction of the human body in order to protect the brain. If that militant got up and faced him while he was unconscious, then Shula would definitely die. In the instant before he fainted, he somewhat helplessly thought of his incomparably tragic end. At this time, at this place, there was no one who could save him. He would definitely die. In the instant before he died, many people's images flashed through Shula's mind. He thought of many things, just like in a movie, but he sorrowfully confirmed that this was not a movie. It doesn't matter, everything doesn't matter. I've seen Jian Shueya, and I've also had a woman. Even if I die, this life can be considered complete. Don't people live to do the right thing? Death, not because of Tai Jiyuan, not because of the political strife or the black screen that I don't know about, but because those people are doing wrong, so I should stop them. But, I'm still so young. Shula was influenced by Shi Qinghai. Using the title of Little Master, he quickly told himself his last words in his mind. Then, he fell heavily on the cement floor full of dirty water. His eyes turned black and he fainted. That ordinary face that had fallen into a coma still had a trace of a bitter smile. The bustling university town of Linhai became a lot more deserted because of the cold winter and the snowstorm. But today, Jian Shueya's first concert in the Federation brought prosperity and liveliness back to this large city group. After watching the concert, people left the stadium, still in high spirits. Along the developed road and rail network, People dispersed to various campuses or cities in Linhai. In the northeast direction of the stadium, there was a highway that was particularly deserted compared to other places, because this highway directly led to another state in the Federation. It required about 12 hours of travel between the ice fields and the mountains to reach it. In such cold weather, no one would choose to go through this highway. Not to mention, because of the continuous snowstorm, this highway was basically in a half-closed state. However, at this time, on this half-closed highway, there was a black car without any logo driving at full speed. Because it was in a half-closed state, the Federation's Traffic Management Committee turned off the automatic heating and snow removal function of this highway, so the snow on the road was very thick. This car ran over the thick snow and ice chips all the way, but its battered body didn't move at all. It still maintained its balance and stability. The black car didn't see a single car along the way. Tai Ji-yuan had unknowingly sat in the co-driver's seat. The two-way seat belt tightly fastened his body. His expression was very cold. His eyes were indifferently looking out the window at the ice and snow wilderness that flashed by from time to time. The target is approaching again. It will enter the attack zone in 7 seconds. The central control computer of the black car issued a warning once again. The car that the Tai family prepared for their heir was extremely powerful no matter how one looked at it. The intelligent judgment program of the central control computer of the car was faintly similar to the central control computer of a spaceship. The moment the computer's voice faded away, a thrilling image appeared on the rear-view screen of the black car. Not far behind the highway, a black military-grade M52 mecha could be seen advancing rapidly in an unstoppable manner. That mecha had already completely switched to forward mode. Accompanied by the vibrations of the huge mecha breaking through the air, the alloy tracks of the mecha continued to crush snow and ice, crushing the concrete blocks on the highway. Its momentum was truly astonishing. Inside the black car, Tai Ji-yuan and Butler Jin's expressions didn't change at all. After coming out of the underground parking lot of the stadium, Butler Jin consciously chose the northeast highway without Tai Ji-yuan's order. Although this might bring some convenience to the pursuit of the military mecha, at least it could ensure that the attack of the military mecha wouldn't cause too much panic among the Federation citizens. The scene of the black military mecha charging out of the stadium and chasing after the black car naturally fell into the eyes of some Federation citizens. However, as long as the war didn't happen in a densely populated area, it could always be covered up in the future. Once the heavy military mecha's horsepower was at full power, it could easily overtake tanks or armored vehicles on open plains. Even on a civilian highway, it wouldn't be hard to believe that it could catch up to the expensive sports cars of the Federation. However, the black car that the Tai family security personnel used as a source of confidence was, of course, a specially made product. It shouldn't only be able to reach a speed of 100 km per hour. Perhaps because the black car had been attacked too harshly in the underground parking lot, its power equipment had been damaged, so it couldn't reach its maximum speed. The black mecha had been chasing after the black car for 2 minutes now. The black car had entered a desolate area with few buildings. The black mecha behind them was getting closer and closer. Seeing that it was about to enter the attack range of the onboard weapons, Butler Jin's expression was still calm. He said softly, "It's not safe. Should we shake it off?" It seemed that it wasn't that the black car of the Tai family couldn't shake off the black mecha behind it, but that it had been holding back for some reason. No. Tai Ji-yuan's eyes stared at the snow outside the window. His heart was even colder than the snow. His hand gripped the handrail of the car window tightly. His knuckles were slightly white. Just a moment ago, his heart suddenly trembled and ached. It was as if something had happened in the stadium that he didn't want to imagine. People from the military are involved in the assassination of civilians. This is equivalent to treason. Tai Ji-yuan's pale face was expressionless. Under the light of the first charter, they are prepared to die at any time. They won't give up any information. If that's the case, don't give them a chance to escape to the Great Triangle. Let them all die, especially this mecha. Butler Jin was silent for a moment, then nodded. Right at this moment, a few strange chirps came from the horizon. It seemed that some kind of flying object was rapidly approaching. Moreover, It was flying at a low altitude. That was why the air was buzzing and the snow on both sides of the road was trembling. Butler Jin's eyes narrowed slightly. He said softly, "They're here." As he spoke, 7 black dots on the horizon at the end of the snowy road were rapidly approaching. They rapidly expanded in their field of vision, revealing their true identities. With a buzz, the snow on both sides of the road shattered. 7 of the most advanced fighter jets of the Federation flew at high speed in a low-altitude combat mode. They flew towards the black car and the valiant black M52 mecha behind it. Chapter 123. The black M52 mecha drove out of the stadium's underground parking lot at high speed and chased after the black car all the way to the snow-covered highway. The pilot who was piloting this mech had always maintained an absolute calm and a strong determination to complete the mission, but his mentality had already undergone some subtle changes. The pilot in the black mecha was called Nado. He was the model of the Federation's military, the most outstanding elite, and the winner of 4 Purple Star medals. The mecha under his control did not make any unnecessary movements. Every move was simple, clear, and deadly. 10 years ago, he had personally piloted the mecha and destroyed 14 Empire mechas on the grassland on a planet controlled by the Empire during the Federation Army's counterattack through the space portal. The black mecha he piloted appeared for the first time. Like a demon, it broke through the thick concrete wall and appeared abruptly from the concrete blocks and smoke. In just 1 second, it had eliminated all the TIE family's security personnel except for the area around the black car. The black mech perfectly controlled the angle of its fan-shaped shooting, trying its best to maximize the lethality of each bullet. With his ability, he should not have given the opponent any chance to escape after lurking for an entire night and using a mecha to ambush a Federation citizen. However, there were 2 accidents during the assassination. These 2 accidents were out of his control and were not his responsibility. The first accident was the black car. Nado, the major in the black mecha, had never imagined that the Federation would have such a sturdy car. Although he knew very well who his target was and how powerful the family behind that young man was, it was still a black car, not a mecha. How was this possible? Even after using up the chain magazine of the M52, such terrifying firepower had only left behind those ugly deep metal craters on the car's body, and had not penetrated the car's body. It was because of the black car's terrifying defensive capabilities that Butler Jin had survived. It had also given Shu Le and Tai Jiyuan, who had reacted quickly, a chance to survive. For Na Duo, the second surprise of the day was the young man in the Westwoods uniform. This excellent pilot did not know why a soldier from the Westwoods would suddenly appear beside his target, but he did not care about the non-target at first, until the other party valiantly and crazily kicked his mecha's mechanical leg. The situation at that time was very much like a Federation proverb. On the highway, a poor insect is holding up its armored arm, trying to show off, trying to stop a speeding vehicle. However, this seemingly crazy and foolish action had successfully interfered with the black mecha's main cannon. Na Duo did not understand why the mecha in his hands, which had always been incomparably stable, would suddenly tremble slightly in that instant. Regardless of whether it was the automatic balancer or his own manual control, neither of them could complete the final calibration. As a result, the first shot from Jiogong's main cannon had actually deviated from its target. This was a strange thing that Na Duo had never encountered in his 20 years of military service. How much force did that young soldier from the Westwoods need to be able to shake the multi-ton body of the M52? And how did the force of that kick interfere with the internal control system of the mecha? Even at this time, driving at high speed on the snowy road, Na Duo still felt that the M52 mecha, which had always been like his own body, seemed to have some sort of wave interference. This caused his control of the mecha to not be particularly smooth, so he kept following the black car but was unable to quickly close in. Most of the citizens of the Federation were materialists, especially the citizens of the 3 administrative planets of the capital ring. Na Duo felt that there was a small problem with his mecha, but he would never have guessed that the young soldier from the Westwoods was still affecting it. His instincts told him that the black car of the Thai family in front of him was using some sort of interference device. It had been some time since the pursuit began in the underground parking lot. The black mecha seemed to be in a fierce pursuit, but it was always unable to reach the effective range of its attack. The mecha still had plenty of power, but it did not have much ammunition left. Na treasured every shot he fired and did not want to waste it. Although the half of his face that was exposed outside of the black helmet was still cold and calm, a very bad feeling had begun to form in his heart. The confidence of this elite soldier of the Federation was slowly fading. He felt a trace of panic and a faint sense of despair. Although this pursuit happened on the deserted highway, it was still in the core area of the Federation, Area S1. The response of the powerful departments of the government would arrive soon. His mission today could only end in failure. Right at this time, thunder seemed to roar in the distant sky. Na stared at the 7 light marks that appeared on the holographic screen in front of him. He confirmed that these were the fighter jets of the Federation. He confirmed that these 7 advanced fighter jets had flown at low altitude and avoided the surveillance radar equipment of the mecha that covered a radius of 20 kilometers. The internal warning of the mecha rang, reminding him that the fighter jets had locked onto his body and could be attacked at any time. These were the K-12 fighter jets that the Federation was most equipped with. They could carry a maximum of 9 air-to-ground missiles. 7 fighters meant that there would be 63 missiles. In just an instant, this number appeared in Na mind. However, at this time, he instead calmed down. Even if he failed today, it would not be the fault of the battle. Instead, it would be those strange accidents and fate that were interfering with his work. At this moment, the resolute lines of the soldier's face became as sharp as a knife. Countless movement commands were inputted into the touch-sensitive holographic screen. Meanwhile, the mecha, which had been maintaining full speed all this while, also began to rapidly change form amidst the loud electrical noise. The tracks on the bottom left their tracks, and the mechanical legs reached out once more, carving deep marks into the concrete ground. Amidst the whooshing sounds, more than 10 grey lines shot over at high speed from the horizon. These were the standard oxtail air-to-ground missiles that the Federation fighter jets were equipped with. These missiles brushed past the edge of the black car in front, shooting towards the black mecha that was rapidly moving in a strange posture behind it. Right at this moment, the black mecha's mechanical legs abruptly stomped on the ground. The entire mecha suddenly leaned forward at high speed, as if it was about to fall to the ground. However, the body of the mecha relied on inertia to flip around in the air, performing a beautiful movement similar to a fighter jet's wing. Amidst the dense barrage of missiles, the mecha found the only path and glided forward, actually dodging all of them. Those terrifying missiles brushed past the black mecha's massive body and struck the surface of the highway, exploding. Who knew how much snow and concrete were sent flying into the air, sending a cloud of dust into the air? However, one of the missiles had landed between the black car and the mecha. Although the mecha had successfully saved its life in that extremely dangerous moment, it could not avoid the missile that had exploded on the concrete ground in front of it. The missile exploded 20 meters in front of the mech. At the last moment, the black mecha still displayed its powerful combat power. Its power output instantly exceeded its peak value. Taking the risk of losing control of the mecha, Na controlled the mecha to perform a jaw-dropping leap on the ground. It avoided the shockwave caused by the missile and flew directly into the sky. However, what was terrifying was that after the missile exploded, it rose even faster than the smoke and dust. Amidst a series of strange and sharp whistling sounds, countless thread-like substances that contrasted with the snowy light suddenly burst out of the missile. The black M52 mech managed to avoid the shockwave and shrapnel from the front, but in the air, it was completely unable to avoid those strands of reflective substance that flew everywhere like catkins. Pissed, 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 pissed. Those fine lines seemed to have a magnetic force, quickly sticking to the smooth and firm surface of the black mech. Those were some dark-colored things that looked like graphite bundles. Electromagnetic beam bomb. Inside the mecha, Na felt a chill in his heart and gave up all hope. The Federation's rescue department had actually, in such a short period of time, installed an electromagnetic beam bomb specifically designed to target Mecca. He no longer had any hope of escaping. The sizzling sound of electricity rang out. Those dark-colored metal wires sticking to the surface of the black Mecca began to flash violently with blue electric arcs. At this time, the M52 Mecca was still gliding valiantly through the air due to inertia. In an instant, it was enveloped by the blue electric arcs, appearing extremely strange. The blue electric arcs disappeared instantly, but the M52 seemed to have lost all power. Its movements in the air abruptly froze, and like a puppet whose strings had been cut, it fell heavily to the ground. Then, it rolled forward stiffly, smashing a large crater in the concrete ground, leaving a perfectly straight trail behind it. After the missiles, the fighter jet finally arrived. Several muffled sounds rang out at almost the same time. The projectiles fired by the ground-to-air cannons plowed several deep trenches in the ground. Cement splattered everywhere, and smoke and dust flew all over the place, heading straight for the Mecca that had already lost its ability to operate. Countless muffled sounds rang out from the surface of the black Mecca at the same time. Those sturdy alloy armor of the Mecca began to deform, begin to be penetrated, begin to be damaged, begin to become an existence akin to trash. Without the sound of sirens, the Special Forces team of the Federation's 1st Military Region approached the black Mecca in the middle of the road in silence and vigilance. Behind them, the armored vehicles with full firepower reserves were ready. This black Mecca's control system had been destroyed by the electromagnetic beam bomb of the fighter jet, and it had also been mercilessly raked by the ground-to-air cannons. The entire body of the Mecca had become extremely tattered, lying miserably on the road. It looked like it no longer had any combat ability. However, in the eyes of the Federation soldiers, Mecca were the most powerful and also the most unpredictable combat machines. They did not know whether or not any accidents would happen. The cabin door of the black M52 slowly opened. On the road below the Mecca, the soldiers raised the muzzles in their hands. The sound of metal clanging against metal rang out one after another behind the Mecca. Taking off his helmet, Na Duo wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. He glanced coldly at the soldiers closing in on the Mecca. Listening to those vague voices ordering him to abandon the Mecca and surrender, he slowly shook his head. When he had faced those 7 Federation planes earlier, he had actually been confident that he could at least shoot down one of the planes that had taken the risk of flying at a low altitude. Chapter 124. Slay the Dimples and says cutely, I'm still writing the next chapter, but the content is more critical, so I'm writing it too slowly. It might be a bit late. Everyone has leaders who need to sleep early, so sleep early. You can come and read it tomorrow, but please leave your monthly ticket. But this pig of mine doesn't seem to have dimples, so I'll slay the fat face. The crisp sound of gunfire echoed in the ears of the nervous soldiers moving forward, reverberating on the quiet highway in the northern suburbs of the university town, reverberating between the snow-covered sky and earth. Tai Ji-yuan retracted his gaze from the screen and tightened his coat around him. He looked at the heavily damaged black Mecca in the distance and frowned, not saying a word for a long time. He didn't know the name of that dead soldier, but he figured that he would find out soon enough. This soldier was clearly an ace pilot of the Federal Army. From the initial ambush in the gymnasium to the subsequent operation on the highway, it all showed this person's incomparable military prowess. Tai Ji-yuan looked at the other side of the highway, a trace of heaviness flashing across his slightly pale face that didn't match his age. Today, he had almost died under the attack of the Mecca. Now that he had confirmed that he was safe, he felt a trace of fear, but he didn't show it. Only the hands exposed outside his sleeves trembled slightly. The faint sound of a helicopter came from the end of the highway. The blood on Butler Jin's forehead had already dried up. He put down the phone beside his ear and came to Tai Ji-yuan's side. He lowered his voice and said, "The soldier in the Mecca is Major Nado, a recipient of 4 Purple Star medals. He is a war hero and belongs to the 2nd Military Region's Special Mecca Brigade. He is the deputy commander. He was supposed to be in the Special Capital Region today to participate in a training session hosted by the Ministry of National Defense. Tai Ji-yuan was silent for a moment, then asked, "The Second Military Region? The Ministry of National Defense's spring offensive should be using the Second Military Region as the main force. If my guess is correct, this Major Nado must have had many comrades who died in the encirclement of the anti-government forces. Yes, this training session in the Special Capital Region is for the upcoming spring offensive against the anti-government forces base in the Green Dragon Mountain region." Butler Jin glanced at the young master's side profile. Yesterday, Councilman Parbray reached a preliminary agreement with the anti-government forces. Today, there's an assassination attempt against you. It seems that the Eagle faction is very angry about the family's interference this time. Don't be in a hurry to find out who the suspect is. The investigation and trial after the incident is the responsibility of the Federation government. Although I'm angry, I can't go above the law and declare someone guilty. Tai Ji-yuan's eyes were as calm as ever. If this matter is related to the reconciliation agreement, there should be many people who don't want the government to reach a reconciliation agreement with the anti-government army. Butler Jin nodded. Although the two of them didn't say it out loud, they both knew that this was the most shocking assassination attempt in the Federation in the past 20 years. The mastermind behind it was definitely not that simple. Councilman Parbray had already taken the most solid step on his path to becoming the president of the Federation. The families and economic tycoons in the Federation all had their own partners among the candidates for the presidency. If this assassination attempt was to eliminate Councilman Parbray's greatest support in the Federation, then the shadows of those families might also be involved. At this time, the simple phone in Butler Jin's hand rang again. He picked up the call and listened in silence for a long time. Then, he said to Tai Ji-yuan in a soft and apologetic voice, "The police and the Federation Investigation Bureau have already sealed off the stadium's underground parking lot. The family representatives have also entered, but for the time being, they haven't found the whereabouts of your friend." Haven't found him? Previously, when they were still being pursued, Tai Ji-yuan had already asked Butler Jin to follow the government's handling of the stadium. He wanted to know whether Shula could actually survive such a desperate situation. Hearing the words "haven't found him," Tai Ji-yuan raised his voice slightly and said angrily, "We can see him when he's alive, and we can see his body when he's dead. What do you mean by haven't found him?" The firepower of the military use mecha was too strong. The body left behind is basically incomplete. Butler Jin glanced worriedly at Tai Ji-yuan as he adjusted his tone. The government personnel are currently cleaning up the scene, so it's normal that they haven't found anything in a short time. According to the reports from the other side, based on the situation at the scene, even if the chip identifies the body, it will still take a long time. Therefore, they may use the biomarker identification program, but that will take 2 weeks. Tai Ji-yuan's usually calm eyes suddenly dimmed. Thinking that Shula might have already become several pieces of broken flesh in the dark underground space, his stomach began to churn. If Shula had been lucky enough to survive, he should still be in the stadium's underground parking lot right now. If he, unfortunately, died, he forced himself to calm down and turned to look at Butler Jin. "Regardless of whether he's dead or alive, I can't wait that long for news. Think of a way to ask that elder from the Bureau of Proclamation for help." The easiest way to confirm the death of a Federation citizen was naturally through the Bureau of Proclamation's central computer. However, the Bureau of Proclamation's computer was responsible for the entire Federation's electronic surveillance network. It was very rare for it to specifically confirm the death of a specific target, unless it was under special circumstances. The current director of the Bureau of Proclamation was a distant relative of the Tai family. Although he was 8 generations removed from Tai Ji-yuan, in the 7 generations of the Tai family, he was the only relative of the Tai family in this world. If the Bureau of Proclamation confirms that Shula is still alive, ask them to help find Shula's whereabouts. Tai Ji-yuan walked towards the tattered black car, leaving behind his last words. Butler Jin's white hair fluttered in the cold wind. He looked at the young master's back with a complicated expression. Although he knew that this was the first time the young master had experienced the death of a friend in his life, he still didn't expect that the young master's usual calm would soon be unable to hide the emotions in his heart. Shula was naturally dead. Asking the Bureau of Proclamation for help was really not a wise decision. It will take at least 2 days to send an application to the Bureau of Proclamation through the government department and get it approved, Butler Jin said behind him. Tai Ji-yuan didn't turn around. He used silence to indicate that this matter had to be done as soon as possible. Mission failed. Federation S1 Capital Special District, in a room in an apartment on a quiet street. The room's windows were covered with a layer of light-filtering film, which could prevent surveillance and even military thermal imaging systems from snooping. In a slightly dark room, a soldier in his 30s put down the phone and looked at his business partner across the table with a serious expression. His business partner was very mysterious, but provided enough information to their side. The news that Tai Ji-yuan was going to watch the concert today was confirmed last night. The soldier stood up from the table and began to organize the documents on the table. He lowered his head and said, "Although I still don't know who the person behind you is, and the cooperation this time was not successful, I hope that there will be opportunities for cooperation in the future." The ordinary person across the table wearing a gray synthetic sweater smiled. He didn't stand up, but he didn't rush to leave either. He looked at the soldier and said, "Who said that our cooperation was not successful? Although the young master of the Tai family escaped with his life, I think that the people behind you have already achieved more than half of their goal." After a moment of silence, the soldier smiled. "We're all small fries that are put on the table. Who knows what the people we serve want to do? But I'm curious how you know that I don't belong to those hot-blooded officers of the 2nd Military Region. Because you are too calm." The soldier fixed the slightly wrinkled synthetic sweater on his body, walked to the window, and carefully looked at the imposing and sturdy building across from him. He said softly, "We are all bystanders. The person who really did it is still in an office in the Ministry of National Defense." The soldier had already organized his belongings and walked behind the soldier. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the Federation's Ministry of National Defense building. He sighed and said, "As a soldier, I actually admire these comrades who are brave enough to ignore the law for the fate of the Federation. But you caused them to go to jail." The soldier's eyes shrunk. He looked at the dozens of military vehicles on the street rushing into the training center next to the Ministry of National Defense building and said, "I don't know how many of the officers in the 2nd Military Region will be eliminated this time. I didn't expect the government and the Tai family to react so quickly." The soldier slowly stood up straight and said with a hint of fear, "The assassination over there just ended, and they were able to find the training center. Her son almost died. Anyone can imagine how angry that madam must be. And in a sense, even the president has to show some mercy in front of that madam's anger. I have to go." The soldier simply turned around and left the dark room. He walked up the stairs of this welfare apartment that belonged to the Ministry of National Defense, took out the phone in his pocket, and began to report to his superior. "Mr. Representative, mission failed." In the dark room, the soldier in the synthetic sweater also made a call. After he calmed down, he said softly, "Mr. Representative, mission failed." After a moment of silence on the other side of the phone, an old voice sounded, "Throw out the bait. I don't want to become the victim of the Tai family's anger. I think you don't want to either." The soldier's expression suddenly became very shocked. He didn't expect that the senator would be so afraid of the Tai family. He didn't even hesitate to cut off his biggest supporter in the Federation government. The soldier and the soldier in the synthetic sweater were just like what they said. They were just insignificant people in the Federation. But the people they served were the people with the most power and influence in the Federation. They didn't know each other's names and identities. They only worked together temporarily for a common goal. They reached an agreement with some important people in the federal military and started to carry out the most unbelievable assassination in the Federation in the past 20 years. Now that the mission was confirmed to have failed, they both smiled at each other and comforted themselves that they could still get some political benefits from the follow-up. But they knew that a failure was a failure, and it was a complete failure. Chapter 125. The assassination in the gymnasium was successfully covered up by the Federation government. On the first day of the new year, if a huge scandal of the military participating in the assassination of civilians broke out, from the President to the Minister of Defense, from the Federation Bureau of Investigation to the Linhai State Governor, no one would have a good year. Although they knew very well that the target of the assassination was not a real civilian, and the cold tone of the madam on the phone made them even more clear that the Federation government had to thoroughly investigate this matter, and not randomly find a scapegoat like the countless political incidents in history. However, the government still needed to hide the truth of the matter from the public, because the government, in the last year of its term, could not withstand any more storms. Fortunately, the madam tacitly agreed with the government's attitude, and even used her family's influence to help the government seal the mouths of most of the media. That night and the next day's television news, as well as the various authoritative print and electronic newspapers, there were no reports of the assassination in the gymnasium in Linhai State's university town. On the contrary, the entertainment and lifestyle section focused on the grand scene of Miss Jen Shuea's first concert in her life. The media reporters, which the government did not want to face the most, were collectively silent in front of this incident. On one hand, they were under pressure from all sides, and on the other hand, they were keenly aware of a certain atmosphere within the Federation. They were waiting to see if the government would give the media and the public some sort of explanation. However, some of the citizens who dispersed later had personally witnessed a black mecha break through the walls of the gymnasium in the wind and snow, charging onto the highway in the northeast direction. These people could not erase their own memories. They were puzzled and did not see any answers in the newspapers, so they could only let these memories become some rumors circulating on internet message boards, as well as shocking headlines in the usually extremely unpopular tabloids. On the day of the assassination, the investigation of the powerful departments of the Federation had already begun with great urgency, because the officers of various departments and bureaus had all received calls from the President's office or some important members of the Management Committee to personally investigate. The enormous national machinery of the Federation government began to operate, and in the shortest amount of time, they found even more information from the pilot named Nado. How did a Federation war hero, the recipient of 4 Purple Star medals, become a shameful assassin? This required historical critics and writers to develop their ideas. The investigators of the Federation government did not pay attention to this. Instead, they directly investigated the Capital Special District. Shortly after the assassination, Special Task Force agents and officials from the Federation Investigation Department, under the protection of the Military Police Headquarters of the Ministry of National Defense, rode in a dozen military vehicles and rushed into the training center next to the Ministry of National Defense building. Under the shocked gazes of countless Federation soldiers, they arrested a total of 93 officers of various ranks from the 2nd Military Region who had come from the front lines of Region S2. The interrogation began quickly that night. There was no interrogation by torture or electric shock. There were only bright lights, surveillance equipment everywhere, and interrogators and recorders who were as cold as metal. The interrogation did not yield any results. The officers who had returned from the front lines and sacrificed their youth and sweat for the Federation coldly stared at the officials in front of them. Their eyes were filled with anger and disdain. The officers who felt that they had been insulted began to curse. After a stalemate for half a night, the interrogators gathered the officers together. The director of the 4th Department of the Federation Investigation Department, who was in charge of the investigation of the assassination, looked coldly at the arrogant and fearless officers in front of him. After a moment of silence, he said, "As a soldier of the Federation, there is a reasonable way to express your wishes. No one disrespects what you have done for the Federation. However, as a soldier, you should respect the law. Some of you know, and some of you may not know. But what I want to say is that the Bureau of Proclamation has marked this incident in the Linhai State Gymnasium as a first-order incident. You should know very well how first-order incidents are dealt with. The high-ranking official of the Federation Investigation Department narrowed his eyes. The coldness in his eyes grew. Do not try to cover up or quibble for your crimes. That will only make your families suffer more humiliation. These officers were escorted back to the training center by the fully armed military police. However, at this time, their identities had become criminal suspects, and they were no longer pillars of the Federation with a bright future ahead of them. Just as these people left the temporary interrogation center, an official walked to the side of the director of the 4th Department and said in a low voice, "The central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation has marked it as a third-order incident. Besides, even if it is a first-order incident, it won't be of much help to this case. Those old ancestors of the Bureau of Proclamation are the best at playing mysterious." The director of the 4th Department lowered his head slightly and said, "How would these officers know anything about the sequence of incidents?" "I'm just giving them some time to think, to be afraid." In the early hours of the next day, perhaps it was because they instinctively had endless respect for the glory of the First Order, or perhaps it was because these officers had a clearer understanding of the majesty of the law, but in any case, the trick of this high-ranking official of the Federation Investigation Department was clearly effective. No one turned themselves in, and no one gave an account of who had organized this assassination, how the black M52 Mecha belonging to the 1st Military Region had ended up in the hands of Major Nadeau, and what kind of orders the small military team sent to the gymnasium had received. 7 officers committed suicide in their own rooms, and no one could be saved. They used this simple method to express their respect for the First Order and the law, to protect their superiors and the ideals that they were willing to sacrifice their lives for. That night, the official residence of the president was hosting a dinner party for the president and the Nebula Award winners. After the dinner party, there was a routine dance party. However, the aging scholars clearly had no desire to dance. They only politely and reservedly watched the dance partners on the dance floor. The applause did not stop. Everything was so lively and joyous. Mr. President Sieg was ending his 2nd term this year. It seemed that he was still a little reluctant to leave the official residence dance party. The people around him had sincere smiles on their faces as they watched the president and the First Lady slowly spinning around. However, in their hearts, they gave disdainful comments. This president was without a doubt the most unforgettable president in the history of the Federation. This was because during his time in office, there was nothing worth writing about. His temperament was cowardly and violent, completely unlike the style he had in the military. If the voters 10 years ago were misled by the false image created by the media, then what about 5 years ago? However, President Sieg was also without a doubt the luckiest president in the history of the Federation. During his 10 years as president, there was no incident that could lead to criminal proceedings. The war between the Federation and the Empire had already ended after he was elected. The anti-government forces in S2 had been in the Federation's territory for many years, so no one would blame him for not solving this problem. It must be said that President Sieg was at least cautious enough, and this is actually an excellent quality. A young and handsome official silently looked at the president he had accompanied for 5 years and gave a different evaluation in his heart. Then, his expression changed slightly. He walked out of the crowd and came to a quiet corridor in the western part of the official residence. This official named Boog was the deputy director of the Office of the President's official residence. He was responsible for handling a lot of administrative work, so even in such a beautiful dance party, his phone would still be connected. However, when he heard the unique vibration pattern of the phone in his inner pocket, he knew who was calling, so his expression became serious. "You should have heard about what happened this morning." A woman's calm voice came from the other side of the phone. "Yes, madam." Boog lowered his voice and smiled at the office worker who walked in front of him. "I don't want something like this to happen again, because I don't want my son to become the target of hatred of the entire federal military in the end." The woman's voice was calm and irresistible. No one thought that those officers would choose this method. After a moment of silence, Boog said, "I'm worried that as the investigation deepens, more people will choose to commit suicide or be killed." The investigation must be carried to the end. I need those real murderers to pay the price for such a shameless assassination. I don't want to criticize the work of the government, but I just want to say that there are enough clues to be found in this case. Please don't just focus on the officers of the 2nd Military Region. As a citizen of the Federation, and as the mother of the victim, I feel that this method is a bit difficult to accept. Boog hung up the phone and fell into deep thought. He knew what Lady Ty's call meant, and since it was like this, he could only criticize the work of the government himself. And according to the information reported by the investigation team, it seemed that the direction of the investigation was really going to touch on the aspects that made the government uneasy. He was a government official, but he was an administrative official. However, no one knew that in reality, he was an official cultivated by the Ty family. At the same time, late at night, Tai Ji-yuan also received a call from his mother. He knew that the Federation government's investigation of the crime, after changing the direction, had successfully approached the core area. When he heard the name of that high-ranking official, even someone as calm as him couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Startled awake by the phone call and waking up from a nightmare, Tai Ji-yuan couldn't sleep anymore. He put on his pajamas and sat beside the orange lamp on the sofa for a long time in silence. He kind of missed the pancakes and porridge that he used to eat at night. Chapter 126. Under the sky of the Federation, there was no such thing as a black curtain that would never be exposed. It was even more impossible for there to be a plan that was so perfect that no clues could be found. Once the black curtain was uncovered and the initiator was exposed, then it would definitely be met with an incomparably ruthless attack from the other side. Therefore, in the recent 10 long years, the political struggles of the Federation had long moved away from shady methods such as assassination. There were no more forces that dared to assassinate the president, and the various forces could at least maintain harmony on the surface. Therefore, on the first day of the 67th year of the Federation calendar, the incident that happened in the Linhai Stadium far away from the capital shocked all of the important figures in the capital. This was already outside the rules of the game, and was a method that was not accepted by the entire class. At this moment, all of the forces vaguely expressed their support for the Tai family, or at least maintained their neutrality and silence. The investigation of the Federation government made important progress that morning. Although the suicide of the 7 officers of the 2nd Military Region brought pressure to the work of the Federation Investigation Bureau, those staff members only changed their direction and continued to investigate. The identity of the militants that attacked the VIP area of the stadium had been identified. Those militants that all died were soldiers from the Linhai Garrison Special Forces. However, as to who gave the direct order to attack, and who was able to turn those soldiers loyal to the Federation into shameful assassination tools, for the time being, no one was able to find out. However, the attentive officials of the Federation Investigation Bureau dug up another valuable clue from the newly built concrete wall in the underground parking lot of the stadium. The engineering team under the Northern Hemisphere Command of the 1st Military Region received this mission the night before the incident. Although the person who gave this order had carefully erased the information that represented their identity in the message, the second layer of information used by the military system was ignored by the person who gave the order. A special agent of the Federation Investigation Bureau keenly captured this point, and found a few letters that indicated their identity in the core sentence of the command document. This special agent had a nickname within the Investigation Bureau, called Harryball, because he liked to wear a synthetic sweater all year round. The Federation Investigation Bureau used the second layer of information to investigate, and all of the spearheads were pointed at a male secretary in the building of the Ministry of National Defense on the morning of January 3 of the 67th constitutional calendar. The Ministry of National Defense building was as solemn and empty as ever. The bright marble floor of the building hall was painted with gold powder with the military emblem of the Federation. Silent and relaxed officers and women walked on this emblem. Inside the incomparably large building, it looked like the other side of the Federation's electronic wall. On the boundless grassland, a few fine horses passed by from time to time. The higher-ups in the building already knew what had happened the day before yesterday. Most of the people in the building already knew what had happened in the training center next to the building yesterday. As for the news that after the officers of the second Mister were collectively arrested, 7 officers committed suicide, presumably the middle-aged woman in charge of cleaning the building already knew. However, the personnel in the core area of the Federal Army still maintained a relaxed expression and a suitable smile on their lips, because the enormous machine would never collapse on itself because of a loose part or rust. The design style of the Department of Defense building was mainly a cold style. The outer wall did not use glass curtain walls that could absorb solar energy. Instead, it chose gray-black natural stone. The entire building was squarish, and the height of 17 floors made this squarish architectural style look a little stiff, like a box. In the internal conversations of the Federation government, it was customary to use the word box to refer to the Ministry of National Defense. This was because in the eyes of the general affairs officials, the soldiers of the Ministry of National Defense were like people in a box. Whether it was the way they walked or the way they talked, they were always so square and angular. On the penultimate floor of the Ministry of National Defense building, there was a very quiet and luxurious office at the end of the corridor. The Deputy Minister of National Defense, Yang Jingsong, worked in this office. Today, he came to the room half an hour early as usual. After drinking a cup of tea to refresh himself, he pulled up the military map of Region S2 on the holographic screen and zoomed in on the area around the mountains. He narrowed his eyes and carefully examined the map to confirm the Federal Army's spring offensive, and to minimize as many command problems as possible. Half an hour quickly passed, and his secretary still didn't knock on the door. Then, she brought in a sandwich. Deputy Minister Yang gently pressed the remote control in his hand, and the map on the holographic screen disappeared. He silently walked to the window and glanced at the beautiful winter scenery of the capital outside. Then, he turned around and sat on the sofa. His secretary hadn't arrived yet, but the phone on his desk rang. Deputy Minister Yang picked up the phone and listened carefully for a long time. He didn't say a word. Then, he sat back on the sofa again. This time, he didn't pick up the teacup. Instead, he found a bottle of liquor from the bookcase, poured himself a glass, and slowly sipped. While drinking the amber liquid, this important figure of the federal military narrowed his eyes and thought about something. He didn't realize that the alcohol he hated the most was so harsh on his throat. His secretary had been invited to investigate, and it seemed that she would never come back. The news he just received on the phone was that the president's security advisor had already entered the Department of National Defense and was about to take the elevator to his office. Deputy Minister Yang's slightly weathered eyebrows slightly furrowed. He took out a document from the cabinet next to him and began to read it in a daze. Regarding the assassination at the Linhai State Gymnasium, although he didn't participate in the investigation, the details of the incident and the progress of the investigation would be sent to him at a certain time. Watching the other party approach him step by step was not a good feeling. After knowing that his secretary was arrested, the deputy minister's mood became more relaxed. Everything that happened on the first day of the 67th year of the constitutional era was all under his instructions. After Deputy Minister Yang Jingsong came back from the front line, he held many positions. Among them, the most respected position was the Dean of the First Military Academy. With his status in the Federation, the important figures who cooperated with him, and even Mr. President himself, would protect him at all costs. Just like the 7 officers who committed suicide the night before yesterday. But he didn't want to do this. He put down his wine glass and came in front of the computer. He wrote an email and sent it to the relevant personnel with the authority to receive it. 40 years ago, I was an ordinary soldier in the 2nd Military Region's Mechanic Company. I once saw with my own eyes countless Federation soldiers sacrifice themselves on the land of Green Dragon Mountain for a great goal. 40 years later, I am the Deputy Minister of the Federation's Department of National Defense. I have full authority to handle the spring offensive plan of the 67th year of the constitutional era. I have never believed the words of politicians. I am even more unwilling to hand the future of the Federation into the hands of people who haven't even seen blood with their own eyes. Having once served as the dean of a court, I know better than anyone that the military must act under the sacred rule of the Federation of Law and Order. But I often wonder, if the collective will of the Federation of Law and Order has already become a toy in the hands of some people, or if it is the result of a compromise between them, where exactly should the military go? A lawyer who grew up in a peaceful environment, without the authorization of the government, reached some kind of agreement with traitors. In my opinion, this is collusion, this is surrender. I believe that I have to stop this from happening. Perhaps history will judge that I am wrong, but I will never admit that I am wrong. After the email was sent, Deputy Minister Yang sighed softly. Many of his comrades who had sacrificed themselves in the war with the anti-government forces appeared in his mind. His gaze once again landed on the document in his hands. The assassination this time was to prevent the so-called reconciliation agreement from being reached. If Tai Jiyuan was killed, that family with a long history would naturally fall into decline or even collapse. And in this situation, Representative Parbre, who they supported, would definitely not be able to be elected president. Then, on the night before the new year, the agreement between Representative Parbre and the anti-government forces might never come to fruition. The reason why this deputy minister chose Tai Jiyuan and not Representative Parbre, whom he disdainfully called a lawyer, was because in his opinion, if he killed Parbre, the Tai family, who was cowardly in their bones and ready to surrender at any moment, could still choose other political partners. It wouldn't solve the problem from the root. The deputy minister's calm gaze landed on an inconspicuous name on the document. If there was any regret in his heart right now, it would naturally be because the assassination plan that his loyal subordinates had meticulously prepared actually didn't succeed. The heir of the Tai family actually survived under the attack of the Mecca. According to the post-incident investigation, the person who played the most critical role in this, the person who had saved Tai Jiyuan's life twice in a row, was undoubtedly the young student who had already died, Xu Le. Deputy Minister Yang downed the strong liquor in his glass in one gulp, then opened the drawer and took out the old-fashioned handgun that had accompanied him for many years. He turned the muzzle of the gun somewhat clumsily and stuffed it into his mouth. He paused for a moment, took a few deep breaths, and then pulled the trigger. The muffled sound of the gunshot echoed throughout the entire floor. The door to the deputy minister's office was forcefully pushed open. The white-haired presidential security advisor and the Minister of Defense pushed aside the military police in front of them and squeezed to the front. They looked at Deputy Minister Yang's corpse on the sofa chair, then at the large pool of shocking red on the snow-white wall behind the chair, and were speechless for a long time. "He can't stand trial," said the Federation security advisor in a low voice. "Perhaps this is the best result." Chapter 127. It's already the 5th day. I think everyone's patience has its limits. Today, Tai Jiyuan did not use his calm gaze to hide the worry in his heart. He stared directly at Butler Jin before him, reminding the other that it had been a long time since the Bureau of Proclamation had confirmed the status of Shula's chip, and he still had not received a definite answer. "I'm very sorry, young master." Butler Jin also seemed to be unable to believe the answer he had received from the Bureau of Proclamation. After deliberating for a long while, he used a more appropriate method to say, "But the Bureau of Proclamation has indeed encountered a problem with the verification of the chip. The identities of the security personnel who died in the gymnasium as well as those military bandits who died have all been confirmed, but it said that when they were verifying Shula's chip, a small problem just so happened to appear in the cloud computing program of the central mainframe." "What problem?" Tai Jiyuan also felt a trace of surprise. "It's not clear. The scientists and staff of the Bureau of Proclamation are not sure either. However, it's said that the fix of this problem is a one-off problem. It will appear every once in a while. Even now, they still haven't been able to figure out the pattern of this problem," said Butler Jin with a smile. "It will take about 6 days for the fix to be fixed. By then, we'll know where Shula is." The good news is, At least we now know that he's still alive. Knowing that Shula was still alive, Tai Ji-yuan's mood instantly relaxed. Although he had been shocked by how Shula had managed to survive the attack of the mecha and those professional soldiers that day, and was even more puzzled by his subsequent disappearance, Tai Ji-yuan was finally in the mood to deal with matters related to himself. Butler Jin looked at the screen of the phone in his hand and reported in a steady voice, Deputy Minister of National Defense Yang Jingsong has died of an acute heart attack. His body will be cremated today. The Minister of National Defense has nominated Zhu Yingxing to take over the position of Deputy Minister. This has already been approved by the President's Office and the Security Affairs Committee. Tai Ji-yuan closed his eyes and leaned against the sofa. Thinking about the political fluctuations in the distant capital, he gradually calmed down. Zhu Yingxing was promoted from the Deputy Director of Logistics of the Ministry of Defense to Deputy Minister. It was obviously unusual for him to be promoted twice in a row. However, this appointment did not meet with any resistance within the government. It seemed that the political figures in the capital had made a lot of concessions in order to appease the Tai family. However, Lady Tai didn't seem to have any intention of stopping here. At the very least, before this case was fully investigated, the upper echelons of the Federation would inevitably experience countless conflicts and compromises. More people had to pay a painful price. This assassination attempt was really too crazy. If the Tai family didn't make a strong enough response, Tai Ji-yuan, as the only heir, would have a difficult time in the Federation in the future. Just as Tai Ji-yuan was silently thinking about his future, Butler Jin had already finished reporting the most important events in the Federation in the past 2 days. Then, the old butler bowed slightly and said, "Young master, we have to prepare for the worst. If Mr. Shula is really unfortunate enough to pass away, we should at least inform his family." Tai Ji-yuan was silent for a moment before saying, "Shula once told me that he doesn't have any family left in this world. He doesn't even have many friends." The corners of his lips curled up slightly as he smiled bitterly. "He's a very pitiful guy. Should we inform Zhong Xiaomeng and Shi Qinghai?" Butler Jin asked. Regarding Shi Qinghai's identity as a spy, there weren't many people in the Federation who really knew about it. Among them were Tai Ji-yuan and Butler Jin. Tai Ji-yuan was deep in thought. His eyebrows slowly knitted together. Because of these two names, he thought of something else. Where did the news of him going to Jian Shuai's concert come from? Deputy Minister Yang had committed suicide, so the military's lead had long been cut off. His knitted eyebrows suddenly smoothed out, and he said coldly, "No need." The Federation Bureau of Investigation's Linhai Field Office building was brightly lit. Shi Qinghai, who had smoked 3 cigarettes in a row in the coffee room, walked to the sink and splashed his cheeks with cold water. He felt a little better, pushed open the door, and walked in the direction of the forensics department. For the sake of the reconciliation agreement between Representative Parbre and the anti-government forces, he was the bridge and information channel. In the dozens of days before the new year, he was under heavy pressure and abnormally busy. He was already very tired. The incident at the stadium on the first day of the new year made the entire field office more nervous than ever. The inside story of this assassination was not known to all Federation officials, but this vicious incident happened in Linhai, so the Linhai field office had to take on a lot of work. Shi Qinghai was responsible for the 4 departments, which actually didn't have much work to do, because until now, they hadn't found any connection between this incident and the anti-government forces in District S2. Their main task was to filter the large amount of information that was monitored in Linhai and try to find any clues. However, Shi Qinghai was still very tired because he was worried about someone. Evidence A1-419. Shi Qinghai walked to the outside of the forensics department's warehouse and said to the staff behind the glass wall, At the same time, he handed over an evidence transfer form. The staff member carefully checked the signature on the form and checked the electronic secondary authentication on the internal work network. Then, he slowly got up and walked into the warehouse. The staff member didn't know why Section Chief Shu was so interested in this evidence and had asked for it several times. However, this piece of evidence was not very important to the case of the stadium. It was just a modified military electric spike. The real key evidence had been sent to the Forensics Department of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the capital 3 days ago. Shi Qinghai took the military electric spike that was sealed in a vacuum bag, calmly said thank you, and then returned to his office. He closed the office door and began to stare blankly at the military electric spike in the bag. It looked a little rough, but it was cleverly designed. In the Linhai Stadium case, Shula's existence was intentionally or unintentionally covered up by someone. Even with Shi Qinghai's level, he shouldn't have known that Shula had appeared in the stadium. However, Shi Qinghai knew. Because at midnight on New Year's Eve, he was happily drinking with Shula in the bar. At the same time, he heard Shula happily say that he was going to visit Jian Shueya with the crown prince of the Tai family tomorrow. He was Shula's friend, no, brother. Therefore, he knew a lot about Shula, such as Shula's strong fighting skills, and Shula's interest and talent in mechanics. He stared at the military electric spike in the bag and confirmed that Shula must have been involved in this matter and played an important role in it. It was written very clearly in the transcript that this military electric spike had already fired an electric arc once, and it had finally appeared in the throat of a militant. That militant was the deputy captain of the special company of the Linhai garrison. Shi Qinghai's private phone rang. On the other end of the phone came the calm voice of the director of the Linhai HTD bureau. The director is dead. Shi Qinghai's body stiffened slightly. He knew that the teacher was talking about Director Yang, the current Deputy Minister of Defense. However, this news had already been seen in the news. Moreover, he had no relationship with that high and mighty big shot. At most, he had shaken hands with him at the graduation ceremony. He didn't understand why the teacher had specifically called him. Be careful these days. The director's voice was very calm. I keep feeling that something wrong is happening. Shi Qinghai didn't speak and directly hung up the phone. After a moment of silence, he began to dial Shula's phone number again, but he still couldn't get through. The call still couldn't get through. Zhong Xiaoming put down the phone in her hand, feeling a little lonely. Walking between the snow trees in the pear garden, she tilted her head and looked at the rooms by the iron gate in confusion. She hadn't seen Shula for a few days. She didn't know where this guy had run off to. Although she served Senator Macklin, she didn't know what had happened at the stadium. She only knew that Shula had gone to a concert and suddenly disappeared. Could it be that he was charmed by Jian Shueya and ran to her house to be a gardener? Zhong Xiaoming laughed self-deprecatingly, but the worry in her heart grew heavier and heavier. She suddenly thought of the contents of a gossip newspaper that the girl in the dormitory next door had read 2 days ago. A cold wind blew, and her body suddenly became extremely cold. She suddenly turned and walked toward her dormitory. She wanted to find out what had happened that day. Shula was indeed a very lonely person. He had lived to the age of 20 in the Federation, but among the tens of billions of people, only 3 people cared about his life and his safety. Unfortunately, he didn't know the sincerity of these 3 friends at this time, because he was still in a coma. He was dreaming. In the underground parking lot of the Linhai State Stadium, Shula fainted in the dark space filled with the smell of burnt flesh, blood, and water. He fell heavily to the ground and fell into a coma. Perhaps it was because he had overexerted the power in his body, or perhaps it was because the warm current in his body had caused some damage to the camouflage chip behind his neck. In any case, the intense pain had knocked him down in an instant, causing boundless darkness to surround him. There was no perception in the darkness, and there was no concept of time. He didn't know when, but a light suddenly flashed in the darkness and didn't leave. It woke him up from his coma and he entered a bizarre dream. In the dream, there was no green grassland, galloping bison, familiar mine pit, dusk, or a face that he missed. There was only an endless white light that moved in a strange way in the space in front of his eyes. Sometimes the white light connected into a straight line that reached the end. Sometimes the white light automatically divided into countless shining fragments. Sometimes the white light became a dot that constantly rippled into the surrounding space. In the dream, Shula looked at these strange scenes unconsciously, and then he found that the white light became a line of words that he could understand in the dark background. Chapter 128. At the moment of life and death in the underground parking lot of the gymnasium, Shula's willpower played a crucial role. His body, which was like a dried-up well without water, actually erupted with power once again. The source of the mysterious power at his waist began to violently spew out the energy he had accumulated for 5 years but never had the opportunity to truly erupt. However, he didn't know how to use this energy. He could only allow this energy to occupy every pair of muscle fibers and every cell in his body. It rushed up and was released like an electric current. Perhaps it was bioelectricity, or perhaps it was an even more miraculous existence that transcended matter. But in any case, after this energy helped him destroy the militants in front of him, it also invaded his brain and nerves, bringing him unbearable pain. Most importantly, when the energy traveled up his back, it passed through the chip that every citizen of the Federation had. It caused great interference to the microelectronic calculations in the chip. This led to Shula's coma and the cloud computing error of the Bureau of Proclamation's central computer. This situation should have never happened in the history of the Federation. However, it was unknown whether or not Uncle Fong Yu had encountered such a coincidental situation back then. It was this extremely rare and bizarre state of the chip that directly caused the Bureau of Proclamation officials to be nervous and the enormous central computer to constantly scan, search, locate, and repair the chip. At this moment, Shula was the Shula in his dreams, the Shula in his instincts. He was neither happy nor afraid. He just stared blankly at the line of white words in front of him, not understanding the meaning of this sentence. Establishing active contact. Do you accept? Shula understood what active contact was. He, who was in this dark space, wanted to contact someone. He didn't even know why he stayed in this boundless dark space. He even forgot who he was. The line of characters condensed from white light in front of him slowly dissipated and then condensed again at an even faster speed. However, it was getting closer and closer to his vision. Establishing active contact. Do you accept? Shula didn't respond. The white characters disappeared again and condensed again, getting closer. Initiate contact. Do you accept? Shula still didn't react because he didn't know how to accept it. He just looked at the white characters in the dark background in astonishment. He wanted to open his mouth but didn't know where to open it. He wanted to reach out to touch the beautiful light and shadow in the dreamscape but didn't know where his hand went. The line of white characters disappeared and condensed again, as if it would never get tired of it. This dream occurred 3 days after Shula had fainted. At that time, he was lying on a strange bed, his body twitching non-stop, his forehead burning, his eyes closed, but in that black dream space, he stared blankly at the white characters in front of him, completely unaware of what was happening in the outside world and what was happening because of him. That day, in a quiet building on the outskirts of the capital, the staff of the Bureau of Proclamation were monitoring the Federation according to the classification of events. Among them, there was a document marked as a Level 3 sequence event. It was entered into the central computer and listed as a priority. Almost at the same time, the central computer gave the results of the calculation and positioning. Separated by a thick partition wall, the staff of the Bureau of Proclamation looked with satisfaction at the several pieces of white paper spat out by the terminal output device. They looked at the names and numbers of the victims of the Linhai State Gymnasium on the paper. As long as it wasn't something that happened too long ago, as long as the exact time and location were given, the central computer could accurately determine the identity of the person through the chip on the back of the person's neck. It could also determine the time of death through the chip's expiration time. Comparing the two, it could give a death list that was close to the truth. First, the glory of the Charter enveloped the entire Federation. The Bureau of Proclamation wasn't omnipotent, but the orderly development and harmony of the Federation was separated from the central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation. This staff member compared the list of events sent by the government with the list in his hand and suddenly found something strange. Because the name in the list of events that was specifically marked in red didn't appear in the positioning results of the central computer. The person called Shula still wasn't marked. Under the harsh terms of the first charter, the central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation would rarely continuously locate a single person who wasn't a Level 1 sequence event. But in the case where the name and identification number were known, it was always very easy for the central computer to determine a person's survival status. This staff member's expression became serious. He held the document in his hand and walked into the elevator. After an unknown amount of time, the elevator stopped. He walked into the assistant director's office and reported to the middle-aged civil servant behind the desk, "There's a problem." "Is it serious?" The assistant director of the Bureau of Proclamation didn't even raise his head. He calmly asked, but in his heart, he wondered if the old director's golf should be replaced. Every afternoon, the director would go for a walk on the lawn, but he threw the complicated work of the bureau to him. It was very tiring, but he was also very happy. "I don't know if this matter is considered serious." The staff member shrugged and handed over the document in his hand. He said, "The survival status of a natural person." The old man actually couldn't immediately find an answer. When the assistant director heard the first half of the sentence, he raised his head in shock. This was because all work in the Bureau of Proclamation was carried out according to a fairly standard process. The events in the Federation were divided into 12 sequences. How could this subordinate say something that he didn't know if it was considered serious? However, when he heard the second half of the sentence, the assistant director's brows furrowed. He said, "Is the information incomplete?" You have to know that the old man is already very old. Searching among a population of tens of billions is not an easy task to begin with. The staff member walked behind the desk in a bad mood and pressed the light screen button. He said, "In the list that was handed over, it just so happens that the person's code is on file. Because someone checked him before, but the result was that he couldn't confirm it." It was very clear that the working atmosphere of the Bureau of Proclamation was very different from what the outside world had imagined. Not only did it not have a mysterious and old-fashioned feeling, but it was very casual between classes. "You're talking about the case in Linhai State?" The assistant director's expression suddenly became serious. This was because he knew that this case was arranged at the last minute. It was like jumping the queue. On one hand, this case involved the upper echelons of the Federation and even the military, which was why it was set as the third sequence of events. More importantly, because the party involved in this case was the family of the old director's distant relative. The assistant director furrowed his brows and looked at the computer screen that continuously scrolled by. After a long silence, he said, "This person called Shula, is he alive or dead?" "You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" The staff member retorted in a bad mood. The assistant director touched his gradually wrinkling forehead uneasily. After a pause, he said, "The self-check program?" The staff member asked a few questions softly through the intercom. He then raised his head and shook his head helplessly. "The self-check program just finished." The old man showed that there was a small logic error in the cloud domain. He looked at the assistant director and asked in a soft voice, "Has this happened before? I remember hearing the old director mention it once." The assistant director painfully rubbed his temples and kept searching through the memories in his mind. "It seems like it will take 6 to 7 days for it to automatically fix itself." The core area of the Bureau of Proclamation was extremely deep underground. The 5-person team that designed the underground structure of the Bureau of Proclamation very proudly announced that in the imaginable era of civilization, no weapon could destroy the core of the Bureau of Proclamation in a short period of time. The core of the Bureau of Proclamation was the central computer, which was the old thing that the staff of the Bureau of Proclamation talked about. This computer had a very long history. Judging from its age, it was old enough to be the ancestor of everyone in the Bureau of Proclamation. Therefore, in its long and boring life, the cheerful staff of the Bureau of Proclamation gave it such a cute and affectionate nickname. The core area was too deep underground. Although the air conditioning system was constantly working, the psychological problem still made it difficult for most people to adapt to this atmosphere. The good thing was that the central computer never needed the help of humans for its processing and information collection. In a sense, from the director to the cleaning lady of the Bureau of Proclamation, all the staff of the Bureau of Proclamation were serving the central computer, the old thing, and the old thing was serving the entire Federation. There was not a single person in the spacious room. A solid and thick physical barrier separated the central computer's display screen from the busy workers. The two-dimensional information display screen in mid-air constantly flashed the radio wave signals, video signals, and audio signals captured by the electronic surveillance network from all corners of the Federation. The images flashed extremely quickly and turned into beams of light or data streams. Those beams of light or data streams were sometimes like a straight line, and sometimes they were divided into countless segments. Sometimes, they were blossoming like waves on the two-dimensional information display, integrating, combing, and retrieving the data in a way that only they could understand. The abnormal logic error in the cloud computing domain did not interfere with the daily work of the Federal Central Computer. It still silently and loyally filtered all the images that it could see, calmly waiting for orders from humans. No staff noticed, or perhaps they were already used to not paying attention, this two-dimensional information display screen that they could not see clearly no matter how hard they tried. In the extremely small corner of the display screen, rows of tiny light runes appeared in sequence. Citizen number, SLAT 510200431X, information node recaptured, name, Schuler, remarks, Federation Criminal Case 37, 67, 1 involved. Warning, information node is abnormal, positioning failed again. Serious warning, 0.4% probability, Citizen Schuler's information overlaps with that of number 72. Response, initiate contact and attempt to locate. If the target refuses, establish an observation system and submit a report for the government to handle. The tiny light runes disappeared, and another row of characters repeatedly appeared on the Federal Central Computer's display screen. Establish active contact, accept or not. Chapter 129. In the summer of year 65 of the 37th Constitution calendar, the Federation's most wanted criminal, Uncle Fengyu, who was determined by the central computer to be in the first sequence of events, was turned into a pile of ash by the Westwoods military's ancient bell. That night, his apprentice, his little sidekick Schuler, accompanied by a thunderstorm, accompanied by a painful howl, replaced the chip in the metal bracelet on his wrist with the back of his neck. From that moment on, Donglin orphan Schuler died, and the young retired soldier Schuler was born. No one in this world knew that at the moment Schuler replaced the chip, in the distant capital ring, Planet S1, in the core area of the Bureau of Proclamation on the outskirts of the Special Zone, the Federal Central Computer had made the following response. Citizen number, DLAS 420500481X, information node missing, name, Schuler, remarks, Federation 4427, target 2, death confirmed. Warning, this is an extension of the first sequence of events. Serious warning, 30% chance that Citizen Schuler has entered an abnormal situation, serial number 72. Citizen Schuler has entered an abnormal situation, serial number 72. Response, search on your own. If you can find them, initiate contact. If the target refuses, establish an observation system and submit a report for the government's reference. Abnormal Situation Handling Program 1, end. More than a year later, the first Abnormal Situation Handling Program was restarted. Although the Federal Central Computer had determined that Schuler orphan from Donglin orphan had a 30% chance of entering an abnormal situation, and Schuler, the gatekeeper from Linhai Prefecture, had overlapping information with the former, so the possibility of entering an abnormal situation was even lower. However, the central computer was still silently and faithfully executing the program. It constantly tried to relocate the damaged information node through the huge network across countless galaxies, trying to form an active contact mode with the other party. In the central computer's records, there had been 72 abnormal situations or suspected abnormal situations in history, all of which were first-sequence events. In the central computer's operational priority level, they were absolute priority. The brilliance of the charter tried to separate a little bit, approaching Schuler who existed in this world like dust. Therefore, the words of those white light talismans began to repeat over and over again, appearing in that space with a dark background, appearing in front of his eyes. However, there was no response, because he was unable to make any response. Initiate contact. Do you accept? After an unknown amount of time, in the spacious room deep inside the building of the Bureau of Proclamation, a row of tiny cursor characters appeared below the two-dimensional projection light screen. Initiating contact has failed. Determining if the other party refuses. Schuler, who was in a coma and in a dream, did not know that he had begun some kind of contact with the most advanced technological civilization in human society. In his dream, he stared blankly at the light talisman in front of him that kept disappearing and condensing. Then, he realized that the light talisman had disappeared. In an instant, a feeling called loss began to spread in this space. The disappearance of the light talisman was actually the central computer determining that the other party did not accept the initiating contact and began the next step of the program activation. If it determined that Schuler had refused the initiating contact, according to the first abnormal situation handling procedure, the central computer would establish an observation system. At the same time, it would produce a situation report in the shortest amount of time and submit it to the Federation government for reference. Without a doubt, if a detailed report on Schuler really appeared in the Bureau of Proclamation, it would definitely arouse the suspicion of many people. The past and history of this fake identity would all be dug up. In front of the Federation's pervasive state apparatus, Schuler would definitely not be able to perfectly play the role of a retired soldier. The true identity of a fugitive from the Federation would be exposed in the light of day, and he would face the severe consequences of the first sequence of events that would follow. This moment was the most critical moment since Schuler's escape. The most dangerous moment might be in the next second. While he was still in the dark dream, he would face the pursuit and assassination of everywhere, just like Uncle Fengyu in the past. The central computer's program paused for a moment at this moment, and then it gave the most logical judgment it thought. Denied. Initiating the second type of contact. In the unconscious Schuler, there were no abnormal changes to the nerves in his cerebral cortex. The microchip behind his neck was determined to be damaged, and the central computer seemed to be able to sense the changes in his brainwaves through a certain method through the microchip. From this, it confirmed that Schuler did not reject its suggestion to initiate contact, but rather, due to some reason, the other party was unable to respond. At this moment, the central computer determined that the target it was constantly searching for was in a completely unconscious state. In other words, it was commonly used in human society to describe a person in a vegetative state. The crystallization of incomparably advanced human technology, the incomparably advanced monitoring methods, and the incomparably mechanical extension of the program finally allowed the central computer to come up with a mechanical and laughable conclusion, but it was also the conclusion that was most likely to be closest to the truth. It had to be said that Schuler's luck played the most important role in this moment. And following the activation of the second type of contact program of the central computer, even more miraculous things began to happen to his body. Countless scenes began to be instilled into his mind through the microchip. Although these scenes would occasionally distort and be interrupted, they continued to steadily pour in and flash before his eyes. What was the second type of contact? No one knew. Schuler was unable to wake up from his black dream. He could only look at the endless darkness. Black represented nothingness, represented death, and represented nothing. Then he saw an image. In the image, a young woman wearing a white nightgown was holding a baby. The young woman's face was filled with unquestionable love, as if she could not wait to devote all of her life to the baby in her arms. This was the most cherished mother-child kinship of mankind. Shula was an orphan. He had lost his parents and sister when he was very young. He missed them, but he had to admit that the faces of his family had long been blurred in his heart. He looked at the mother-child pair in the image and felt slightly envious, but did not have too strong of a reaction. That unknown existence seemed to have sensed this. A second image appeared before his eyes. It was a group of children running and kicking a ball on the grass. This represented youth, represented friendship. Shula did not have many friends. He cherished them, but did not have much of a reaction. In the black dream, those strange images appeared more and more, and the speed at which they appeared became faster and faster. They filled the entire space. Those images showed the most spectacular snowy mountains on the Westwoods planet, the magnificent red rocks in the S3 desert in the upper forest, the beautiful lakes in the outskirts of Philadelphia, and even more so, the endless starry sky that gave people a sense of awe and reverence. Those stars that had existed in the universe for hundreds of millions of years seemed to exist forever. In the black dream, the layer of red artificial dust above the planet of the East Forest region appeared, and the open-air mine pits that were barely visible under the dust appeared. Those mines had made great contributions to human civilization, and now they lay quietly in the green grassland. They looked like gunshot marks on the planet, and there was a breathtaking beauty to them. Shula felt that it was very familiar. His heart ached, but he subconsciously felt conflicted. Along with his emotions and the subtle reactions in his cerebral cortex, the scene in the black dream changed again. It turned into expensive cars, into delicious delicacies from all over the world, into champagne with tiny bubbles rising from it, and into hard liquor with a sweet taste in its amber color. Countless bright and beautiful colors appeared in the black dream. Those were women. There were all kinds of women. There were female students with long canine teeth and ponytails wearing student uniforms. There were upper-class women in formal wear who walked slowly. There were young girls wearing tennis skirts with their bare thighs and exuding a youthful aura, mature, young, beautiful, bashful, sunny, delicate, clothed, partially undone, completely naked and seductive. Women followed the bright images and walked gently. The images in the black dream included the aspects that humans valued the most and desired the most. However, they were still not enough to cause the muddle-headed Shula to have too strong of a reaction. The rapid influx of images and data caused the entire dark dream space to become somewhat unstable. Countless invisible cracks seemed to be tearing at something. Shula couldn't feel his body, but he felt an unbearable pain. He wanted to cry, he wanted to scream, but there were no tears, and he couldn't make a single sound. In the black dream, the constantly flashing images served to accentuate the loneliness of his consciousness. While he was lonely, he still had to endure such pain. The space was expanding, as if it could explode at any moment. If it wasn't for Shula's consciousness existing in the dream being as tenacious as his body, perhaps he would have already gone mad. He had to remember something, grab hold of something. At this time, in the rapidly flashing images, a chipboard appeared. The tiny solder points on it glowed faintly against the black background. With a single thought, the switching of images slowed down. All sorts of tools with their shells removed, those familiar household appliances that had accompanied him for many years, those exposed circuit boards, those hard metal brackets, those blueprints, those precise equipment in the control room, all of them were displayed in the black space in the form of images. He stared at one of the blueprints and studied it carefully. That unexplainable pain finally subsided a little. He felt that the lines and structure on the blueprints were very familiar. It was an M52, a black M52. It was the military mecha that had broken through the wall in the underground parking lot of the gymnasium. With a single thought, countless blueprints of the internal structure of the mecha flew in from the periphery of the black space like snowflakes. They flew in front of his eyes and into his mind, as if they were very happy to have found something that he could focus on. He had seen some of the blueprints before, but he had never seen most of them before. Those circuits and design ideas were so novel, and those control system designs were so beautiful. Shula stared at everything in front of him in a daze. He gradually remembered some of it, but began to look greedily at those images. However, The images moved faster and faster, so fast that he could not see them clearly at all. But strangely, these images that entered the black dream seemed to exist in his mind. The images flowed in faster and faster. The space of the black dream could not hold on any longer and shattered into countless pieces. That intense pain returned to Shula's mind. With a buzz, he fainted, fainting in the dream. But he woke up in reality. The black dream shattered, and a white light descended upon the human world. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the faint sunlight coming in through the window. He saw the girl wearing a white gauze dress under the sunlight. He saw that smear of purple. He remembered what had happened before he fainted, but subconsciously judged that he was still dreaming. If it was not a dream, how could he see this smear of purple? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.